The eight-circuit model of consciousness, as described by Robert Anton Wilson in his book Prometheus Rising, narrated by Felix Warren. The eight-circuit model of consciousness is a hypothesis by Timothy Leary, later expanded on by Robert Anton Wilson and Antero Ali, that suggests 8 periods or circuits and 24 stages of neurological evolution. The 8 circuits, or 8 systems or brains, as referred by other authors, operate within the human nervous system. Each corresponds to its own imprint and subjective experience of reality. Circuit number 1, the oral biosurvival circuit. Few of our ancestors were perfect ladies or gentlemen. The majority of them were not even mammals. Any multicellular organism must, if it is to survive, contain a hardwired biosurvival circuit, which very simply programs an either-or choice. Go forward to the nourishing, the protective, or go back, away from the threatening, the predatory. Any mammal hooks the biosurvival circuit to the first imprinted biosurvival object, the teat. Biosurvival and orality are deeply blended in all mammals, including domesticated primates, or humans. This is why, despite the cancer terror, an estimated 85 million Americans still smoke cigarettes. Others chew gum, spearmint, juicy fruit, even sugar-free, something for every taste, bite their fingernails, gnaw their knuckles, scrunch pencil stubs, eat more than they need. Potato chips, anyone? A Mars bar, maybe? Pretzels, peanuts, cashews. Do you want the cheese and crackers with your beer, Mac? And do try the canapes, Mr. Miller. Some chew their lips, gobble tranks and uppers, even munch their mustaches. What goes on in the bedroom is known to the Kinsey Institute and anyone who has seen a porn film. How important is this oral imprinting? We read of a baby giraffe whose mother was accidentally killed by a jeep immediately after birth. The neonate, following hardwired genetic programs, imprinted the first object that roughly fit the giraffe archetype, the jeep itself. He followed the machine around, vocalized to it, attempted to suckle from it, and, when adult, tried to mate with it. Similarly, Konrad Lorenz tells of a gosling who accidentally imprinted a ping-pong ball and spent his adult life, indifferent to female geese, attempting to sexually mount ping-pong balls. As Charles Darwin noted, in our maturer years, when an object of vision is presented to us which bears any similitude to the form of the female bosom, we feel a general glow of delight which seems to influence all of our senses. The ancients pictured the great mother goddess Diana of Ephesus with literally dozens of breasts, and St. Paul reports hearing her worshippers chanting rapturously, "Great is Diana." There is virtually no great artist who has not left us a portrait, or many portraits, of the nude female form, especially the breasts, and even in non-human scenes, curves are introduced whenever possible. Architects break the Euclidean straight line to introduce such curves at the slightest pretext, arches, Moorish domes, etc. The curves of the suspension bridge are necessitated by Newtonian laws, gravity's rainbow in Pynchon's phrase, but still, these double catenary curves are aesthetically pleasing for the reasons Darwin suggests. As for music, where did we first hear it? Who sang or hummed to us? And against what part of her body were we held? Mountain climbers are reduced, like Maori, to saying, "because it's there," when trying to explain their compulsion to ascend those iconic peaks. Our eating utensils, oral gratification tools, tend to be rounded or curved. Square plates or saucers look campy or strange. UFOs come in a variety of shapes, but the most popular are the oval and conic. Freudians suggest that opiate addiction is an attempt to return to the womb. In keeping with our theory, it is more likely that opium and its derivatives return us to the safe space on the biosurvival circuit, the warm, snug place of biosecurity. Opiates may trigger neurotransmitters characteristic of breastfeeding. Footnote: neurotransmitters are chemicals which alter the electrocolloidal balance of the brain and hence change the perceptual field, brain change agents. In summary, the biosurvival circuit is DNA programmed to seek a comfort safety zone around a mothering organism. If a mother isn't present, the closest substitute in the environment will be imprinted. For the orphan giraffe, a four-wheeled jeep was chosen to stand in for the four-legged mother. The gosling who could not find the round white body of the mother goose fixated a round white ping-pong ball. The wiring of this circuit in primitive form occurred in the first organisms between 3 and 4 billion years ago. In the modern human, this structure remains in the brainstem and in the autonomic involuntary nervous system, where it is interconnected with the endocrine and other life support systems. This is why disturbances on this circuit act all over the body at once and generally take the form of physical symptoms rather than mental symptoms, and usually get referred to the MD instead of the psychiatrist. It must be stressed that we are still in a primitive stage of evolution, and conditions on this planet are quite brutal. Radical pediatricians insist with good evidence that childbirth by conventional means in a conventional hospital is almost always traumatic for the newborn, creates a bad imprint in our language. Our child-rearing methods are far from ideal also, adding bad conditioning on top of bad imprinting. In the general violence of our societies to date, including wars, revolutions, civil wars, and the undeclared civil war of the predatory criminal class in every civilized nation, keeps the first circuit of most people in an emergency state far too much of the time. In 1968, a U.S. public health survey showed that 85% of the population had one or more symptoms that we could call a bad first circuit imprinting or conditioning. These symptoms included dizzy spells, heart palpitations, wet palms, and frequent nightmares. This means that 85 out of the next 100 people you meet should be regarded as, more or less, the walking wounded. This is the first level of meaning in our brutal, cynical proposition that most people are almost as mechanical as sci-fi robots. A man or woman entering a new situation with the anxiety chemicals of a frightened infant coursing through the brainstem is not going to be able to observe, judge, or decide anything very accurately. Footnote: we specifically refer to adrenaline and adrenalutin, which signal the whole organism to prepare to fight or flee. And this is why Gurdjieff said in his own jargon that people are asleep and having nightmares. Fairness, decency? How can you expect fairness or decency on a planet of sleeping people? Of course, on top of the hardwired imprinting of the biosurvival circuit comes softer conditioning. This allows the safe space perimeter to be generalized outward from the mother's body to the pack or tribe, the extended family. Every social animal has, in addition to the Darwinian instinct genetic program of self-preservation, a similar instinct to protect the gene pool. This is the basis of altruism, and social animals could not survive without it. Wild dogs and wolves bark to warn the rest of the pack that an intruder is coming. Your domesticated dog identifies you as a pack leader. He barks to warn you that an intruder is coming. He also barks, of course, to warn the intruder that he is ready to fight for his territory. As civilization has advanced, the pack bond, the tribe, the extended family, has been broken. This is the root of the widely diagnosed anomie, or alienation, or existential anguish, about which so many social critics have written so eloquently. What has happened is that the conditioning of the biosurvival bond to the gene pool has been replaced by a conditioning of biosurvival drives to hook onto the peculiar tickets which we call money. Concretely, a modern man or woman doesn't look for the biosurvival security in the gene pool, the pack, the extended family. Biosurvival depends on getting the tickets. You can't live without money, as the living in theater troupe used to cry out in anguish. If the tickets are withdrawn, acute biosurvival anxiety appears at once. Imagine as vividly as possible what you would feel and what you would do if all your sources to biosurvival tickets, money, were cut off tomorrow. This is precisely what tribal men and women feel if cut off from the tribe. It is why exile, or even ostracism, were sufficient punishments to enforce tribal conformity throughout most of human history. As recent as Shakespeare's day, the threat of exile was an acute terror signal. "Banished," cries Romeo, "that damned use of that word in hell." In traditional society, belonging to the tribe was biosecurity, exile was terror, and real threat of death. In modern society, having the tickets, money, is biosecurity. Having the tickets withdrawn is terror. Welfarism, socialism, totalitarianism, present attempts in varying degrees of rationality and hysteria to create the tribal bond by creating the state stand-in for the gene pool. Conservatives who claim that no form of welfare is tolerable to them are asking that people with total biosurvival anxiety, anomie combined with terror. The conservatives, of course, vaguely recognize this and ask for local charity to replace state welfare, i.e., they ask for the gene pool to be restored by magic among people, denizens of a typical city, who are not genetically related at all. On the other hand, the state is not a gene pool or a tribe, and cannot really play the biosurvival unit convincingly. Everybody on welfare becomes paranoid because they are continually worrying that they are going to get cut off, exiled, for some minor infraction of the increasingly incomprehensible bureaucratic rules. And in real totalitarianism, in which the bogus identification of the state with the tribe is carried to the point of a new mysticism, the paranoia becomes total. Real bonding can only occur in face-to-face groups of reasonable size. Hence the perpetual attempt, however implausible in industrial circumstances, to decentralize, to go back to the tribal ethos, to replace the state with syndicates, as in anarchism, or affinity groups, Reich's Consciousness 3. Recall the hippie crash pad of the 60s, which lives on in many rural communes. Back in the real world, the tickets called money are the biosurvival bond for most people. Anti-Semitism is a complex aberration of many facets and causes, but in its classic form, the Jewish bankers' conspiracy, it simply holds that a hostile gene pool controls the tickets for biosecurity. Such a paranoia is inevitable in money economy. Junkies have similar myths about who controls the supply of heroin. Thus, as anti-Semitism has declined in America, the bankers' conspiracy lives on in a new form. Now the villains are old New England WASP families, the Yankee establishment. Some leftists will even show you charts of the genealogies of these WASP bankers, the way anti-Semites used to show Rothschild genealogies. C.H. Douglas, the engineer and economist, once made up a chart, which he showed to the Macmillan Commission in 1932 when they were discussing money and credit regulation. The chart graphed the rise and fall of interest rates from the defeat of Napoleon in 1812 to the date the Commission met in 1932, and on the same scale the rise and fall of the suicide rate in that 120-year period. The two curves were virtually identical. Every time the interest rate went up, so did the suicide rate. When interest went down, so did suicide. This can hardly be a coincidence. When interest rises, a certain number of businessmen go bankrupt, a certain number of workers are thrown out of their jobs, and everybody's biosurvival anxiety generally increases. Marxists and other radicals are urgently aware of such factors in mental health and hence scornful of all types of academic psychology which ignore these biosurvival issues. Unfortunately, the Marxist remedy, making everybody dependent for biosurvival on the whims of a state bureaucracy, is a cure worse than the disease. Biosurvival anxiety will only permanently disappear when worldwide wealth has reached a level and a distribution where, without totalitarianism, everyone has enough tickets. The Hunger Project, the idea of the guaranteed annual income, etc., represent groping toward that goal. The ideal can only be achieved in a technology of abundance. Extreme cases, persons who take their heaviest imprint on the first oral circuit, tend to be viscerotonic, because this imprint determines lifelong endocrine and glandular processes. Thus, in extreme, they are baby-faced in adult life, never lose their baby fat, are plump and round and gentle, etc. They are easily hurt, terrified, threatened, by disapproval of any sort, because in the baby circuit of the brain, disapproval suggests extinction by loss of the food supply. We all have this circuit and need to exercise it periodically. Cuddling, suckling, hugging, etc., and daily playing with one's own body, another's body, and the environment are perpetually necessary to neurosomatic and endocrine health. Those who deny such primordial functions because of rigid imprinting on the third rationalistic or fourth moralistic circuit tend to become dried up, prune-faced, unattractive, cold, and muscularly rigid. The baby functions of playing with one's own body, another's body, and the environment continue throughout life in all animals. This playfulness is a marked characteristic of all conspicuously healthy individuals of the sort Maslow calls self-actualizers. If this initial imprint is negative, if the universe in general and other humans in particular are imprinted as dangerous, hostile, and frightening, the prover will go on throughout life adjusting all perceptions to fit this map. This is what's known as the injustice collector syndrome, in the language of Dr. Edmund Bergler. Such a pattern is unconscious in three ways. It is unconscious because automatic, it happens without thought, as a robot program. It is also unconscious because it began before the infant had language, and hence it is preverbal, inarticulate, felt rather than considered. And it is unconscious because it is all over the body at once. Specifically, it is characterized by the respiratory block first noted by Wilhelm Reich, a chronic muscular armoring that prevents proper, relaxed breathing. Popular speech recognizes this state as being uptight. All of the most successful re-imprinting techniques, therapies, for this kind of chronic anxiety work on the body first, not on the mind. The Reichians, Rolfers, primal scream therapists, Ors, rebirthers, gestaltists, etc. all know, whatever specialized jargons they may use, that a bad biosurvival imprint can only be corrected by working on the biological being itself, the body that feels perpetually vulnerable and under attack. As Gregory Bateson has pointed out, Konrad Lorenz acquired his marvelous insights into the imprinting process, for which he won the Nobel Prize, by consciously imitating the body movements of the animals he was studying. Watching Lorenz lecture, one could see each animal he discussed because Lorenz would dramatize or become that animal in the manner of a method actor. Even earlier, Wilhelm Reich discovered that he could understand his patients with remarkable clarity by imitating their characteristic body movements and postures. The biosurvival imprints, especially traumatic ones, are all over the body, frozen, in Reich's metaphor, in chronic muscle and gland mechanisms. If you can't understand somebody's irrational behavior, start by observing their breathing. You will very quickly get an idea of what is bothering them. This is why all schools of yoga, Buddhist, Hindu, or Sufi, place such emphasis on restoring natural breathing before trying to move the student on to higher circuits and wider consciousness. This is of more than psychological import. Every study of the psychosomatic aspects of cancer and asthma, for instance, finds that this pattern of chronic muscular contraction, subjectively felt as anxiety, among the predisposing factors. What the thinker thinks, the prover proves. People are strangling their inner organs every day because they are afraid. Mary Baker Eddy may have been exaggerating slightly when she said, "An illness is manifested fear." But holistic medicine more and more recognizes that if that damned word all is replaced by a more tentative most, Mrs. Eddy was closer to the facts. Even old-fangled MDs who won't consider holistic ideas for a minute admit that some persons are mysteriously more susceptible to disease than other persons. What is this metaphysical susceptibility? Anthropologist Ashley Montagu has collected numerous statistics on children who were deprived of maternal love at the crucial point of imprint vulnerability in infancy. They not only died younger than the national average, but were sicklier all their lives and even grew up to be several inches shorter than the average adult height for their sex. What makes for susceptibility, aside from possible genetic factors, can only be such an anxiety imprint, muscle tension, on the first circuit. Christian Science, or any other religion that dogmatically insists that God wants us to be happy and successful, can cure such conditions miraculously. What the thinker thinks, the prover proves. Absolute faith that God is supporting you, beamed out from the brain all day long, day after day, signals the muscles to relax, and natural buoyancy and health returns. Throughout human life, when the biosurvival circuit senses danger, all other mental activity ceases. All other circuits shut down until the biosurvival problem is solved, realistically or symbolically. This, of course, is of crucial importance in mind-washing and brain programming. To create a new imprint, first reduce the subject to the state of infancy, i.e. biosurvival vulnerability. We will enlarge upon this later. In pre-neurological terms, the biosurvival circuit is what we usually call consciousness per se. It is the sense of being here now in this vulnerable body, subject to the raw energies and forces of the physical universe. When we are unconscious, the biosurvival circuit is turned off and doctors may cut us up without our attempting to flee or even cry out. Exercises. Determine to enjoy this primitive circuit fully from now on. Play with yourself and others and the environment shamelessly, like a newborn baby. Meditate on, unless ye become as a little child, ye shall in no wise enter the kingdom of heaven. 2. Never mind your diet. You will reach the optimum weight for your height when your brain is operating properly. Enjoy one really sweet and gooey dessert every week. 3. Get high on marijuana if this is permissible to your superego, or on ginseng, which is legal everywhere and recommended by many holistic physicians. And then go to a health spa. Enjoy a good swim, a massage, and a sauna. Repeat every week, forever. 4. Take a course on Kung Fu or Karate for at least 3 months, then reread this whole chapter. You will be surprised at how much more every sentence will mean. 5. Lie on your back and pant rapidly on the count of 20. Each exhale-inhale cycle counts as 1, not as 2. Panting means breathing rapidly through your mouth, as forbidden by almost all experts on health, but this is only an exercise, not a full-time practice. When you reach 20, Stop and resume nose breathing in the slow, rhythmic manner recommended by yogis to the count of 20. Then repeat the panting to the count of 20. Then repeat proper yoga breathing. This is known as the breath of fire in Tantric Yoga. The breath results are most amusing and enlightening. Try it. Footnote. Like opiate use, this exercise seems to trigger neurotransmitters similar to mother's milk, i.e., it takes you back to the snug security of breastfeeding, and it is not addictive. Visit an aquarium and observe very closely. Try to see the biosurvival circuit of the fish brain in operation and recognize when and how that circuit in your own brain has operated throughout your life. 7. If you don't have a baby or haven't had one for many years, play with somebody else's baby for an hour, then reread this chapter. Circuit number 2, the anal emotional territorial circuit. The second circuit, the emotional territorial networks of the brain, is concerned entirely with power politics. This patriotic circuit is built into all vertebrates and is perhaps 500 million to 1,000 million years old. In the modern human, it seems to be centralized in the thalamus, the back brain or old brain, and is linked with the voluntary nervous system and the muscles. This circuit appears in each newborn when the DNA master tape sends out RNA messenger molecules to trigger the mutation from neonate to toddler, which involves first of all standing erect. Walking, mastering gravity, overcoming physical obstacles, and learning to manipulate others politically are the vulnerable points at which imprinting and heavy conditioning occur. The muscles that perform these power functions are quickly programmed with what become chronic, lifelong reflexes. Depending as always on the accidents of the environment, what happens at points of neurological vulnerability, this circuit will organize itself into a strong dominating role in the pack or family, or a weak submissive role. Without going into the jungles with the ethologist, one can observe this mammalian imprinting process in any litter of puppies. It is very quickly determined who is top dog and who is bottom dog. Status in the pack or tribe is assigned on the basis of pre-verbal signaling system, kinesics, in which these muscle reflexes are crucial. All of the emotional games or cons listed in the popular psychological game manuals of Dr. Eric Byrne and the transactional analysts are second circuit imprints or standard mammalian politics. To quote from my novel, Schrödinger's Cat, most of the domesticated primates of Terra did not know they were primates. They thought they were something apart from and superior to the rest of the planet. Even Benny Benedict's 1 month to go column was based on that illusion. Benny had actually read Darwin once in college a long time ago, and had heard of sciences like ethology and ecology, but the facts of evolution had never really registered on him. He never thought of himself as a primate. He never realized his friends and associates were primates. Above all, he never understood that the alpha males of Unistat were typical leaders of primate bands. As a result of this inability to see the obvious, Benny was constantly alarmed and terrified by the behavior of himself, his friends, and associates, and especially the alpha males of the pack. Since he didn't know it was ordinary primate behavior, it seemed just awful to him. Since a great deal of primate behavior was considered just awful, most of the domesticated primates spent most of their time trying to conceal what they were doing. Some of the primates got caught by other primates. All of the primates lived in dread of getting caught. Those who got caught were called no-good shits. The term no-good shit was a deep expression of primate psychology. For instance, one wild primate, a chimpanzee, taught sign language by two domesticated primates, scientists, spontaneously put together the signs for shit and scientist to describe a scientist she didn't like. She was calling him shit scientist. She also put together the signs for shit and chimpanzee for another chimpanzee she didn't like. She was calling him shit chimpanzee. You no good shit, domesticate primates often said to each other. This metaphor was deep in primate psychology because primates mark their territories with excretions, and sometimes they threw excretions at each other when disputing over territories. One primate wrote a long book describing in vivid detail how his political enemies should be punished. He imagined them in an enormous hole in the ground with flames and smoke and rivers of shit. This primate was named Dante Alighieri. Another primate wrote that every primate infant goes through a stage of being chiefly concerned with biosurvival, i.e. food, i.e. mommy's titty. He called this the oral stage. He said the infant next went to a stage of learning mammalian politics, i.e. recognizing the father, alpha male, and his authority and territorial demands. He called this, with an insight that few primates shared, the anal stage. This primate was named Freud. He had taken his own nervous system apart and examined its component circuits by periodically altering its structure with neurochemicals. Among the anal results exchanged by domestic primates when fighting for their space were up your ass, go shit in your hat, you're full of shit, and many others. One of the most admired alpha males in the kingdom of the Franks was General Cambronne. General Cambronne won this adulation for the answer he once gave when asked to surrender. Merde was the answer General Cambronne gave. The word petard means a kind of bomb. It comes from the same Old English root as fart. General Cambronne's mentality was typical of the alpha males of the military caste. When primates went to war or got violent in other ways, they always said they were about to knock the shit out of the enemy. They also spoke of dumping on each other. The standard authority reflex on the emotional territorial circuit is to swell the muscles and howl. You will find this among birds as well as mammals, and in the board meeting of your local bank. The standard submission reflex is to shrink the muscles, lower the head, and crawl away. You will find this among dogs, primates, fowl, and employees who wish to keep their jobs everywhere. If the first biosurvival circuit is chiefly imprinted by the mother, the second emotional territorial circuit is chiefly imprinted by the father, the nearest alpha male. It has been proposed by sociologist G. Rattray Taylor that societies swung back and forth between matrist periods in which motherly oral values predominate and patrist periods in which fatherly anal values are in ascendance. Taylor's table of the characteristics of these matrist and patrist periods is as follows. First matrist and then patrist. Permissive toward sex, restrictive toward sex. Freedom for women, limitation of freedom for women. Women have high status, women have low status. Chastity not valued, chastity highly valued. Egalitarian, authoritarian. Progressive, conservative. No distrust of research, distrust of research. Spontaneous, inhibitions. Sex differences minimized, sex differences maximized. Fear of incest, fear of homosexuality. Hedonic, ascetic, mother goddess, father god. Whether or not societies wobble between these extremes as Taylor claims, individuals certainly do. These are merely the consequences of A, having the heaviest imprint on the oral or matrist biosurvival circuit, or B, having the heaviest imprint on the anal or patrist territorial circuit. In pre-ethological terms, the emotional territorial circuit is what we usually call ego. Ego is simply the mammalian recognition of one's status in the pack. It is a role, as sociologists say, a single brain circuit which mistakes itself for the whole self, the entire brain-mind apparatus. The egotist behaves like a 2-year-old in the common saying, because ego is the imprint of the toddling and toilet training stage. The question of how human an animal is, especially a pet dog or cat, never ceases to divide scientists from laypersons and one scientist from another. In terms of the present theory, the differences between domesticated primates, or humans, and other domesticated animals are virtually nil, as long as we are talking only about the first two circuits. Since most people spend most of their time on these primitive circuits, the real differences are often much less obvious than the similarities. Real differences begin to appear when the third, semantic circuit enters the picture. For instance, novice dog trainers always make the mistake of using too many words. Because the dog is so human in many ways, canines, like primates, are great mimics. The novice imputes too much humanity to them. The average dog has a vocabulary of around 150 words, and within that semantic universe is quite bright. It is very easy to teach a dog the meaning of sit, stay, attack, etc., and the dog will learn the meaning of walk and food even without your trying to teach him. The problem begins when the novice expects the dog to understand something like, no, Fritz, anywhere else in the bedroom but not on the bed. Even a non-English speaking human would not grasp that, except vaguely. The dog gives up on such sentences and guesses what he can from your mammalian and unconscious body language. Understanding these distinctions can vastly improve primate canine communication. For instance, my wife, a sociologist, trained one dog not to beg at the table in the most direct mammalian language possible. She simply growled at him the first few times he approached her while she was eating. She had been reading ethology, of course. The dog understood fully. He soon learned to avoid the table while the pack leaders, my wife and myself, were eating. His genetic programs told him we were the big dogs, or as close to the big dogs as he could find in that environment. Dogs, like wolves, have a genetic program about not annoying the big dogs while they're eating. The growl told him all he needed to know about the local parameters of that rule. Persons, extreme cases, who take the heaviest imprint on this emotional territorial circuit tend to be musculotonic. That is, they hold most of their attention and energy in the muscular attack defense systems and grow up medium weight, heavy enough to be hard to knock down, light enough to be quick and sinewy. Often they become bodybuilders, weightlifters, etc., and have an extraordinary absorption in demonstrating their strength. Even shaking hands with them, you get the message that they are not exchanging amity, but demonstrating power. Most societies shunt these types into the military, where their propensities are put to proper ethological use, defending the tribal turf. The anal orientation of this circuit explains the oddity of military speech first noted by Norman Mailer. Ass means one's whole self, and shit means all surrounding circumstance. Viscerotonic. Circuit 1 type, oral imprint. Musculotonic. Circuit 2 type, anal imprint. Imprinting affects the whole nervous system. The nervous system affects the whole body. The second emotional territorial circuit creates a two-dimensional social space in conjunction with the first circuit advanced retreat. The grid of circuits 1 and 2 creates 4 quadrants. Note that hostile strength, the tyrant, is inclined to paranoid withdrawal. He must govern, but he is also afraid. Of the careers of Hitler, Stalin, Howard Hughes, etc., and the inaccessible castle and court in Kafka's allegories. Note also that the dependent neurotic is not in retreat at all. He or she advances upon you, demanding fulfillment of emotional needs or imprints. These 4 quadrants have been known since the dawn of self-consciousness. For instance, in the terminology of the medieval psychology of humors, these 4 imprint types are known as choleric humor, hostile strength; phlegmatic humor, friendly strength; melancholy humor, friendly weakness; bilious humor, hostile weakness. Clockwise, the phlegmatic type, friendly strength, was identified with the lion archetype and the element fire. The lion, because of the dignity of these big cats, represents good strength, and the fire represents power. The melancholy type, friendly weakness, was identified with the angel archetype and the element water. These people are too sensitive to fight and go with the flow. The bilious types were identified with the bull archetype, truculent suspicion and paranoia, and the element earth standing for sluggish pseudo-stupidity. This is the traditional stance of defeated races dealing with their conquerors. The choleric types, hostile strength, were identified with the eagle archetype, symbol of imperial Rome, the German royal family, etc., and the element air. Air probably means sky, because these types seem high and mighty. These symbols go back a long way. Kabbalists find them in the Old Testament, where indeed the lion, angel, bull, eagle appear in Ezekiel. They are found constantly in Catholic art, associated with the 4 evangelists, Matthew angel, Mark lion, Luke bull, John eagle, and all run through the design of the tarot card decks, medieval and modern. Footnote: these are the 4 old men in Finnegan's Wake. Matt Gregory, because his last name contains ego, equals the angel. Marcus Lyons equals the lion. Luke Tarpey equals Tar, the bull. Johnny McDougal equals Oogle, the eagle. In the clever language of the fashionable transactional analysis system, these 4 imprint types are categorized as the 4 basic life scripts, to wit: choleric hostile strength. I'm okay, you're not okay. Phlegmatic friendly strength. I'm okay, you're okay. Melancholy friendly weakness. I'm not okay, you're okay. Bilious hostile weakness. I'm not okay and you're not okay. It is the melancholic friendly weakness dependent neurotic type who generally turn up in the psychotherapist's office seeking re-imprinting voluntarily. They are not okay, but they have great faith that the therapist is okay. The choleric or hostile strength and bilious hostile weakness arrive in therapy, if at all, only because their associates or families, or more commonly a law court, has ordered them to try to re-imprint their compulsive hostilities. The phlegmatic, friendly strength type virtually never comes for psychotherapy. He or she is satisfied with his or her life, and so is the rest of society. Alas, they nonetheless can get to the position where they need therapy of some sort, simply because they may take on too much responsibility and carry too many burdens. They will generally arrive at the therapist only if sent there by an MD who has intuitive where their ulcers came from. This system is not meant to be rigid or to imply that there are only 4 types of humanoid robots. The later circuits, still to be discussed, modify all this considerably. Some imprints are wobbly, cover 2 or more quadrants partly, and we are all capable of sudden brain change. It is also important to realize that the 4 archetypes are for convenience only, and they are convenient as witness their reappearance in transactional analysis, where the historical connection with lion, angel, bull, eagle isn't even recognized. But each quadrant can be subdivided much more sharply if necessary for diagnostic purposes. For instance, a widely used psychological test in this country is the Leary Interpersonal Grid, 1957. It divides the 4 quadrants into 16 subquadrants and allows one to grade each in terms of moderate to excessive tendency to behave that way. In the grid on which the Leary categories are drawn, the moderate imprints are in toward the center, and the excessive or extreme cases are out toward the perimeter. But what is being measured is still basically the way first 2 circuits, oral bio, survival, and anal territorial, are imprinted. To clarify this a bit further, imagine that 4 babies were all born at the same instant in John J. Boskowitz Memorial Hospital, any town, planet Earth. We come back 20 years later and we find that each of them has a separate personality and lifestyle, a problem for the astrologers, but let that pass. To make things easier for us, they have actually landed into 4 quadrants. Subject number 1 is responsible over conventional, phlegmatic. Everybody agrees that they are usually a beloved community leader, helpful, considerate, friendly, and solidly successful. Some may even say they spoil people with kindness, forgive anything, agree with everybody, and actually enjoy governing those who cannot govern themselves. The noble lion. This person may be, and probably is, a total robot. That is, if they can never give orders in a strict way, they are never able to doubt others, and they are never ego-centered, etc., then they have mechanically imprinted the first quadrant, friendly strength. On the other hand, if they are able to move out of the first quadrant in appropriate situations, exercising hostility against the marauder or predator, admitting weakness when overwhelmed, they have imprinted conditioned predilection for I'm okay, you're okay, but are not totally robotized by it. Subject number 2 has, after the same 20 years of imprinting and conditioning, landed in quadrant 2, friendly weakness, melancholy. They are self-critical, shy, timid, easily led, spineless, and always looking for somebody to take charge and give orders. The unearthly angel, or in modern symbolism, the flower child. Again, this imprinting conditioning may be totally robotic, or there may be enough flexibility for the person to jump to another quadrant when necessary. Subject number 3 had landed with total robothood or with some small flexibility in quadrant 3, hostile weakness, bilious. They distrust everybody, rebel against everything, speak constantly in sarcasms, complain chronically, and are generally bitter, resentful, and to some extent paranoid. The sullen bull. Subject number 4 has landed in quadrant 4, hostile strength, choleric, and is regarded as bossy, cold, feeling, dictatorial, self-important, boastful, etc., but still in the judgment of most, a good leader, the imperial eagle. The irony and tragedy of human life is that none of these subjects are at all aware of their robotry. Each will explain to you at great length and with great conviction why each of these robotic, endlessly repeated reflexes are caused by the situations around them, i.e. by the bad behavior of other people. What the thinker thinks, the prover proves. Thus, if you put these 4 primates on a desert island, you can predict with virtually as much certainty as a chemist telling us what will happen if 4 elements are compounded, as subject number 1 and 4, friendly strength and hostile strength, will both try to take over. Number 1 to help the others, number 4 because they can't imagine anybody else in control. Number 1 will submit to number 4 because number 1 wants things to run smoothly for the good of all. and they never will run smoothly if number 4 is not top dog. Number 2, friendly weakness, will not care whether number 1 or number 4 rules, just so long as somebody else is making the decisions. And number 3 will complain and complain and complain no matter who is in charge, while skillfully avoiding any action that would require taking personal responsibility. The same political decisions would be made by 4 chimpanzees or 4 dogs if they have the 4 imprint quadrants equally divided as in our hypothetical example. Sociobiologists who are very aware of these 4 quadrants in both human and animal societies claim that each organism is born with a genetic predisposition to play one of these roles. Critics of sociobiology who are dogmatic liberals denounce this idea as monstrous. We will not attempt to decide that difficult question here, since any attempt to decide what aspects of behavior are genetic and what are learned after birth always descend into ideological metaphysics in the prevailing absence of real data. We will say merely that, whether or not you and I were born with a predisposition for one quadrant, all organisms are born with a predisposition for imprint vulnerability, and the imprint, once set in the neural circuitry, acts as robotically as any genetic hardwiring. How imprints can be changed will be discussed as we proceed. The exercises in each chapter are intended to make imprints a little less rigid, a little more flexible. The top 2 quadrants of the Leary grid, friendly strength and hostile strength, correspond roughly to what Nietzsche called Herrenmoral, the ethics of ruling classes. Indeed, choleric hostile strength is the embodiment of Nietzsche's blonde beast, the primitive conqueror pirate type we find at the dawn of every civilization. This is what Nietzsche also called the animal or unsublimated form of the will to power. Friendly strength, on the other hand, does not correspond, except very slightly, to Nietzsche's sublime willed power. To find that, we will have to wait until we come to the 5th neurosomatic circuit, the stage of conscious evolution. The bottom 2 quadrants, friendly weakness and hostile weakness, correspond to Nietzsche's Sklavmoral, the ethics of slaves, serfs, and lower caste or lower class persons everywhere. Nietzsche's contempt of resentment, the hidden revenge motive within altruistic philosophies, claims there is an element of hostility within even the friendly weakness side of the grid, i.e. in conventional Christian ethics, as typified by the image of gentle Jesus, meek and mild. This paradox, the friendly weakling is a hostile weakling in disguise, the flower child a potential Mansonized robot killer, reappears in modern clinical parlance as the concept of passive-aggressive. Occultists in their strange jargon describe these types as psychic vampires. This is why Nietzsche claimed that St. Paul had destroyed the evangel, good news of Jesus, and replaced it with a disangel, bad news. The evangel of Jesus, as Nietzsche saw it, was the sublimated will to power, the path of conscious evolution to superhumanity. The disangel, the bad news, created by St. Paul was traditional Sklavmoral. Slaves, obey your masters, but nourish your resentment with the firm belief that you are good and they are evil, and you will eventually have the pleasure of watching them burn in hell forever. In Nietzsche's analysis, all Marx added to this was the idea of burning and punishing the master class here and now instead of waiting for God to attend to the matter post-mortem. The same analysis appears in E. Cummings's unforgettable couplet on the communist intelligentsia of the 1930s. Every comrade is a little bit of concentrated hate. It is interesting in this connection that Nietzsche dropped psychological language from his books as he went along and replaced it with physiological language. For instance, in his later works such as The Antichrist, the resentment within slave morality, conventional Christianity, is diagnosed as a physiological reaction characteristic of certain physical types. Nietzsche was on the right track, but lacking neurology, he looked for the physical basis of these processes in genetics alone. Imprinting theory suggests, on the contrary, that such physiological bottom dog reflexes are created by specific triggers at early moments of imprint vulnerability. But they are nonetheless all over the body at once and hence physiological. Any method actor knows this, and his body will swell physically if he is playing a strong character and shrink if he is playing a weakling. Rod Steiger, in particular, actually seems taller or shorter depending on whether he is playing a top dog or a bottom dog. Remember again that all these categories are for convenience and that nature has not employed the sharp boundaries that we use in our models of nature. Thus, with Leary's 1957 schemata, we can further subdivide our 4 types into 16 types with 4 degrees of each, for a total of 64 subtypes. In the next section, to simplify what may be growing too complex, we will reduce everything again just to the interactions of the first two circuits. Any system for describing human behavior should be flexible enough to be extended indefinitely and should also still contain meaning when reduced back to its fundamentals. Since we all contain a territorial emotional circuit, we need to exercise it daily. Playing with children is one good exercise, especially if you play with large groups, in which case you will have to referee mammalian territorial disputes. Swimming, jogging, or whatever else appeals to you is good to keep the muscles from feeling you are trying to starve them. Trying to psych out somebody else's emotional state is one of the best exercises for this circuit, and is very educational in general. It activates the old mammal centers in the thalamus, where body language communicates emotional signals. A good general uses this circuit to psych out what the enemy general is planning. A good mother uses it, vice versa, to figure out what baby's howl means in each particular case. Advanced work within this circuit involving some hazards in personal relations would involve such games as learning to bully somebody if you've never been able to do that before, learning to submit docilely if you've never been able to do that before, and learning to express anger appropriately and letting go of it when it is no longer necessary. It will be observed by the thoughtful or visually oriented readers that each extreme type can be expressed on the Leary grid as a very off-center pie slice. Friendly strength, hostile weakness, friendly weakness. Obviously, an ideally balanced person, that is, one not robotized and able to adjust to circumstances as they arise, would not be so off-centered. Such a person would be able to move a little bit into each quadrant according to the times and seasons, as the Chinese say, but would basically maintain a centered detachment between all of them. He or she could be graphed as a circle. The dark inner circle would represent the adamantine individuality of this ideally detached person, detached from robot imprints. The gray circle would represent the ability to move out into each quadrant in times when that was necessary. Circles of this sort, called mandalas, are widely used for meditation in the Buddhist tradition. Often they are cornered by four demons who evidently, like the Occidental lion, bull, angel, and eagle, represent the extremes to be avoided. Exercises. When you meet a young male or female, ask yourself consciously, if it came to hand-to-hand combat, could I beat him or her? Then try to determine how much your behavior is based on unconsciously asking and answering that question via pre-verbal body language. 2. Get roaring drunk and pound the table, telling everybody in a loud voice just what dumb assholes they are. Footnote. Opiates and small doses of alcohol seem to trigger neurotransmitters characteristic of Circuit 1 breastfed tranquility. Large doses of alcohol often reverse this and trigger neurotransmitters characteristic of territorial struggle. Note the anal vocabulary of hostile drunks as their alcoholic intake increases. 3. Get a book on meditation, practice for 2 15-minute sessions every day for a month, and then go see somebody who always manages to upset you or make you defensive. See if they can still press your territorial retreat buttons. Footnote. A good new book on meditation is Undoing Yourself with Energized Meditation and Other Devices by Christopher S. Hyatt. This book is published by Falcon Press. 4. Spend a weekend at an encounter group. During the first half day, try to intuit which quadrant each participant is coming from. At the end, see if any of them have become less robotized. See if you have become less robotized. 5. Go to the lion house at the zoo. Study the lions until you feel you really understand their tunnel reality. 6. Go to see the kind of comedy that small children like, The Three Stooges, Abbott and Costello, etc. Observe carefully and think about what function this humor serves, but don't neglect to laugh at it yourself. 7. Spend all day Sunday looking at animal shows on TV, getting stoned on weed if this is permissible to you. Then go into the office the next day and observe the primate pack hierarchy carefully, like a scientist. Circuit number 3. The time-binding semantic circuit. Human beings are time binders. The third semantic circuit handles artifacts and makes a map, reality tunnel, which can be passed on to others even across generations. These maps may be paintings, as in illustrations, or words, concepts, tools, with instructions on use transmitted verbally, theories, music, etc. Human beings, domesticated primates, are symbol-using creatures, which means, as the pioneer semanticist Korbisky noted, that those who rule symbols rule us. If Moses, Confucius, Buddha, Muhammad, Jesus, and St. Paul can be considered living influences, and they are, look around the world, this is only because their signal has been carried to us by human symbol systems. These systems include words, artworks, music, rituals, and unrecognized rituals, or games, through which culture is transmitted. Marx and Hitler, Newton and Socrates, Shakespeare and Jefferson, etc., continue to rule parts of humanity in the same way, through the semantic circuit. We are ruled even more and even less consciously by the inventors of the wheel, the plow, the alphabet, even the Roman roads. Since words contain both denotations, reference in the sensory existential world, and connotations, emotional tones, and poetic or rhetorical hooks, humans can be moved to action even by words which have no real meaning or reference in actuality. This is the mechanism of demagoguery, advertising, and much of organized religion. The biosurvival circuit only divides experience into two sets, that which is good for me or nourishing, and that which is bad for me or threatening. The emotional territorial circuit also divides the world into two halves, that which is more powerful than me, higher in the pecking order, and that which is less powerful than me, lower in the pecking order. On this basis, socio-biological systems evolve and animal societies of truly human complexity have been studied. The semantic circuit allows us to subdivide things and reconnect things at pleasure. There is no end to its busy labeling and packaging of experience. On the personal level, this is the internal monologue discovered by James Joyce in Ulysses. On the historical level, this is the time-binding function described by Korbisky, which allows each generation to add new categories to our mental library, connecting new things, separating new things, classifying and reshuffling forever. In this time-binding dimension, Einstein replaced Newton before most of the world had heard of Newton. Simple arithmetic gave birth to algebra, which brought forth calculus, which produced tensor calculus, etc. Footnote: most of the world was illiterate until the last decade. Haydn and Mozart prepared the way for Beethoven, who broke into the realms that the Romantics and Wagnerians took over, which gave birth to what is called music today. So-called future shock has always been with us, since the semantic circuit began functioning somewhere in prehistory. In a symbolizing, calculating, abstracting species, all times are times of change. The process is, however, accelerating faster as time passes because the symbolizing faculty is inherently self-augmenting. In ordinary language, the semantic circuit is usually called the mind. As psychologist Robert Ornstein said in a recent radio show, when we say someone has a good mind, we generally mean they have a good mouth, i.e., they use the semantic circuit well. In terms of transactional analysis, the first, oral circuit, is called the natural child, the second, emotional circuit, is called the adapted child, and the semantic circuit is called the adult or computer. In Jungian terms, the first circuit mediates sensation, the second circuit feeling, and the third circuit reason. The neurological components of the first circuit go back to the oldest parts of the brain. Carl Sagan calls these functions the reptile brain. These neural structures are at least billions of years old. The second circuit structures appeared within the first amphibians and mammals, somewhere around 1,000 million or 500 million years ago. Sagan calls them the mammalian brain. The semantic circuit appeared perhaps 100,000 years ago. Sagan calls it the human brain. It should be of no surprise that most people, most of the time, are controlled more by the older reptilian mammalian circuits than by the human semantic rational circuit, or that the semantic circuit is so easily perverted into false logics, bigotries, intolerant ideologies, fanaticisms of all sorts, when the biosurvival circuit signals threat to life or the emotional circuit flashes threat to status. Cynics, satirists, and mystics, circuit 5 to 8 types, have told us over and over that reason is a whore, i.e., that the semantic circuit is notoriously vulnerable to manipulation by the older, more primitive circuits. However much the rationalists may resent this, it is always true in the short run. That is, to use one of the rationalists' favorite words, it is always pragmatically true. Whoever can scare people enough, produce biosurvival anxiety, can sell them quickly on any verbal map that seems to give them relief, i.e., cure the anxiety. By frightening people with hell and then offering them salvation, the most ignorant or crooked individuals can sell a whole system of thought that cannot bear 2 minutes of rational analysis. And any domesticated primate alpha male, however cruel or crooked, can rally the primate tribe behind him by howling that a rival alpha male is about to lead his gang in an attack on his habitat. These two mammalian reflexes are known respectively as religion and patriotism. They work for domesticated primates, as for the wild primates, because they are evolutionary relative successes, so far. The emotional territorial or patriotic circuit also contains the pack's status programs or pecking order. Working in tandem with first circuit biosurvival anxieties, it is always able to pervert the functioning of the semantic rational circuit. Whatever threatens loss of status and whatever invades one's space, including one's ideological headspace, is a threat to the average domesticated primate. Thus, if a poor man has one status prop in his life, I'm a white man, not a goddamn nigger, or I'm a normal, not a goddamn faggot, or whatever, any attempt to preach tolerance, common humanity, relativism, etc. is not processed through the semantic circuit, but through the goddamn emotional circuit, and is rejected as an attack on status, ego, or social role. Diagram of two axes. One is retreat to advance. It is crossed by dominate to submit. Footnote. Of course, preaching itself is bad Second Circuit politics, since it puts you one up on the person preached at. You are not one up unless imprinted as such by being an alpha male in the same gene pool or conditioned as such by being a boss or other authority figure. The counterculture of the 1960s, like many other idealistic movements, failed because it did so much preaching from a morally one-up position when nobody had been imprinted or conditioned to accept it as a one-up. The attentive reader will remember that the grid of the first two circuits puts the preverbal child in a two-dimensional world, which in the simplest of our diagrams looked like this. See preceding page. The third semantic circuit seems intimately connected with three-dimensionality, although our binocular vision, of course, also plays a role here. Specifically, right-handedness is a human, or at least a primate trait. Other mammals show no right-hand preference. They are ambidextrous. Recent neurology has shown that our right-handedness is intimately connected with our tendency to use the left hemisphere of the brain more than the right. The left-handed minority are discussed below. Indeed, we use the right hemisphere so little in ordinary life that for a long time it was called the silent hemisphere. Thus, there is a genetic, hardwired preference in most humans for right-handed manipulations and left brain mentations. Now these connections seem intimately involved with our verbal, semantic circuitry because the left brain is the talking brain. It is linear, analytical, computer-like, and very verbal. Thus, there is a neurological basis for the linkage between mapping and manipulating. The right hand manipulates the universe and makes artifacts, and the left brain maps the results into a model, which allow for predictions about future behavior of that part of the universe. These are the distinctly human or post-primate characteristics. The left-handed, on the contrary, specialize in right brain functions, which are holistic, supraverbal, intuitive, muscular, and musical. Leonardo, Beethoven, and Nietzsche, for example, were all left-handed. Traditionally, left-handed people have been the subject of both dread and awe, regarded as weird, shamanic, and probably in special communication with God or the devil. Footnote. Aleister Crowley knew about this pragmatically before modern neurology. He taught his pupils to learn to write equally well with both hands, thereby forcing the dormant right brain to spring to activity. There is thus a crossover which makes for a left-right polarity in both brain functioning and hand functioning, each being a reverse mirror image of the other. Left brain, left hand, right brain, right hand. This double and reversed right-left polarity places us neurologically in three-dimensional space. Rearranging our diagram and adding the third circuit, we can illustrate the mind field as follows. Two crossed arms between dominant and submit in left hand and right hand, crossed by an axis that comes forward towards the reader that goes from retreat to advance. To visualize this two-dimensional sketch of a three-dimensional system, it is necessary to imagine that the advanced retreat axis is at right angles to the others. That is, see it coming out of the page at you. This is Euclidean space. It is obvious in this context why Euclidean space was the first kind of space discovered by mathematicians and by artists, and while it still seems natural to us, why some have great difficulty in imagining the non-Euclidean kinds of space used in modern physics. Euclidean space is a projection outward of the way our nervous systems stack information on the biosurvival, emotional, and semantic circuits. Thus, the imprint sites of this circuit are located in the left cortex and closely linked with the delicate muscles of larynx and the fine manipulations of right-handed dexterity. The cortex itself is so recent in evolution that it is often called the new brain. It is found only in the higher mammals and is most developed in humans and cetaceans, dolphins and whales. Those extreme cases who take their heaviest imprint on the third circuit tend to grow up cerebrotonic. They are tall and skinny because energy is perpetually drawn upward from the body into the head. The caricatured evil genius, Dr. Solanus in Superman, who is virtually all head, represents the extreme toward this type, which seems to be evolving. Popular speech calls them eggheads. Almost always, these cerebrotonic third circuit types ignore or are hostile to their first and second circuit functions. Playfulness puzzles them, appears silly or eccentric, and emotions both baffle and frighten them. Since we all contain this circuit, we all need to exercise it regularly. Make up a schematic diagram of your business or home and try to streamline it for more efficiency. Design a chart that explains the whole universe. Every few years, study a science you know nothing about at an adult education center. And don't neglect to play with this circuit. Write poems, jingles, fables, proverbs, or jokes. Remember, Mr. Crowley said, "You too are a star." P.S. He also said, "Do not lust after results." Viscerotonic, Circuit 1, Imprint. Jung's feeling type, natural child. Musculotonic, Circuit 2 imprint. Jung's sensational type, adapted child. Cerebrotonic, Circuit 3 imprint. Jung's rational type, adult or computer. The neurological imprint is the blueprint for the entire organism. As with the earlier circuits, the semantic circuit builds all of its conditioning and learning onto a bedrock of hardwired imprinting. Thus, many existentially thinkable thoughts are socially unthinkable, since A, everybody in a given society has roughly the same semantic imprint, and B, this is reinforced daily by assumptions that are mechanically taken for granted. Thus, a genius is one who, by some internal process, breaks through to Circuit 6, a minor neurological miracle loosely called intuition, and comes back down to the third circuit with the capacity to paint a new semantic map, build a new model of the experience. Needless to say, this is always a profound shock to those still trapped in the old robot imprints and is generally considered a threat to territory, ideological headspace. The long list of martyrs to free inquiry, from Socrates onward, shows how mechanical this neophobia, fear of new semantic signals, is. As Thomas Kuhn showed in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, science itself, the apotheosis of Third Circuit semantic rationality, is not free of this neophobia. Kuhn demonstrated at length that each scientific revolution took one full generation to turn over the worldview. And Kuhn further showed that the older scientists never are converted to the new semantic paradigm. They are, in our terminology, mechanically hooked to their original imprints. The revolution is complete, as Kuhn shows, only when a second generation, not hooked to the old imprint, is able to compare the two models and decides rationally that the newer one really does make more sense. But if science, the most self-correcting of all information processing third circuit functions, has this one generation time lag, what can be said of politics, religion, economics? Time lags of centuries or even millenniums are common there. Footnote. This only refers to other people's politics, religions, and economics, needless to say. The reader's own opinions on these subjects are the only reasonable and objective ones, of course. We commented earlier that in biosurvival neurology there is no time. I just found myself doing it, we say after passing through an automatic reflex on the biosurvival circuit. Emotional territorial circuit actions begin to include time as a factor. Dominant signals may not work. The seemingly weaker mammal may offer a counter-challenge. Two dogs will walk around each other for several minutes, growling and sniffing. The chemical secretions of each reveals the actual degree of fear to the other, before top dog and bottom dog becomes clear. On the human level, we often agonize over emotional decisions, becoming acutely conscious of time as we hesitate. As every suspense writer knows, the principal way to increase emotional tension is to set a time limit on a difficult or dangerous decision. See any Star Trek script, the time limit is never missing, or see any of Irving Wallace's bestsellers. Suspense is always increased, of course, if the time limit is abruptly shortened just before the climax. On the third circuit, time becomes conceptualized as well as experienced. We know ourselves as creatures of time. The tale of the tribe, the totem pole, the Odyssey of Homer, the Old Testament, the Vedas, etc., tell us that what came before and often contains prophecies of what will come later. Science expands the third concept into contemplation of time spans that stagger our imaginations. The very use of written languages and other symbols like mathematics creates the time-binding sense of Korzybski. We all know ourselves as receivers of messages sent by sages of old and as potential transmitters of messages that may be scanned ages in the future. The fourth circuit causes us to be even more involved in and pressured by time. In closing this chapter, let us be reminded that Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake February 18, 1600, for teaching that the earth moves. Was he guilty or not? Exercises. 1. If you are a liberal, subscribe to the National Review, the country's most intelligent and witty conservative magazine, for a year. Each month, try to enter their reality tunnel for a few hours while reading their articles. 2. If you are a conservative, subscribe to the New York Review of Books for a year and try to get into their headspace for a few hours a month. 3. If you are a rationalist, subscribe to Fate magazine for a year. 4. If you are an occultist, join the Society for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal and read their journal, The Skeptic, for a year. 5. Buy a copy of Scientific American and read an article in it. Ask the following questions. Why do they sound so sure? Does the data support dogmatism at this point? Or is dogma a primate habit defending headspace? Will these theories still be believed in 1999, in 2011, in 2593? 6. Get into a discussion of philosophy with an educated Marxist, an intelligent Muslim, and a Japanese businessman at the first opportunity. 7. Buy some Zoom or Lyft, two names for the same caffeine-high stimulant, at a health food store. This gives a close approximation of the effects of illegal cocaine. When you are zooming or lifted and your mind is racing, find a victim and explain the universe to him or her until they are able to escape you. What you experience in this speed rap is what the head of the compulsive rationalist is always like. This is the verbal circuit gone wild and totally oblivious to information coming in on any other circuit. It explains why most people cannot stand rationalists. Speed drugs evidently trigger neurotransmitters characteristic of the verbal centers of the left cortex. Circuit number 4. The moral socio-sexual circuit. The socio-sexual circuit is activated and imprinted at adolescence, when the DNA signal awakens the sexual apparatus. The teenager becomes the bewildered possessor of a new body and a new neural circuit oriented to orgasm and sperm-egg fusion. The pubescent human, like any other rutting animal, lurches about in a state of mating frenzy, every call gasping for the sexual object. Imprint vulnerability is acute, and the first sexual signals to turn on the adolescent nervous system remain fixed for life and forever determine the individual's sexual reality. We should not be surprised, therefore, at the various fetishes that are so easily acquired at these sensitive moments. In fact, we can tell precisely at what period in time a person was sexually imprinted by noting which fetishes continue to turn him or her on. Black garters, booze, cool jazz, and crew cuts define the sexual signals of one imprint group or generation just as rigidly as sleeping bags, marijuana, heavy rock, and tight jeans define another. As Masters and Johnson have pointed out, most sexual dysfunctions are hooked into the nervous system at these adolescent moments of acute imprint vulnerability. Their archetypal case is that of a male who, about to mate for the first time, in the backseat of a car, was traumatized by a policeman flashing a light on him and his paramour. The imprint of that ghastly moment was hooked up for decades. The male remained impotent until reprinted by Masters and Johnson in their clinic. The choices of heterosexuality or homosexuality, brusque promiscuity, or timid celibacy, are usually imprinted by exactly similar accidents at points of imprint vulnerability. Just as biosurvival anxiety or security are imprinted by accidents in the nursing period, emotional domination or submission by accidents in the toddling period, symbolic dexterity or stupidity by the accidents of the learning environment. Primitives, so-called, know these facts and surround all of the points of imprint vulnerability with rituals, ordeals, rites of passage, etc., well designed to imprint the desired traits of a well-integrated member of that tribe at that time. Relics of these imprint ceremonies survive in baptism, confirmation, bar mitzvahs, marriage ceremonies, the Masonic raising, etc. It is important to realize that chance, genetics, and malice, anger, are among the accidents that create imprints at the points of vulnerability. Most humans do not, due to accidents of this sort, imprint exactly the socio-sexual role demanded by their society. The fourth circuit can almost be called the guilt circuit. Almost everybody, almost everywhere, is quite busy hiding their real sexual profile and miming the accepted sex role for their gender in their tribe. In ordinary language, the imprint on the socio-sexual circuit is generally called the mature personality or the sexual role. It is the parent in the jargon of transactional analysis. It is amusing to note that Freud recognized the first circuit as the oral stage, the second as the anal stage, and the fourth as the genital stage. He did not notice the third semantic circuit, perhaps because as an obsessive rationalist he was so absorbed in verbal and conceptual programs that they were invisible to him, as water may be to fishes. Similarly, Jung described the first circuit as the sensational faculty, the second as the feeling faculty, the third as the rational faculty, and skipped the socio-sexual circuit entirely. There may be a clue here as to why Jung could not abide Freud's fourth circuit emphasis and built a separate, less sexual psychology of his own. Jung then went on to lump all the higher circuits under the rubric of the faculty of intuition. It is the function of the nervous system to focus, to select, to narrow down, to choose from an infinity of possibilities the biochemical imprints which determine the tactics and strategies that ensure survival in one place, status in one tribe. The infant is genetically prepared to learn any language, master any skill, play any sexual role. In a very short time, however, he or she becomes mechanically, robotically fixated to accept, follow, and mimic the limited offerings of his social and cultural environment. In this process, each of us pays a heavy price. Survival and status mean forfeiting the infinite possibilities of unconditioned unconsciousness. The domesticated primate, inside the social reality tunnel, is a trivial fragment of the potentials for experience and intelligence innate in the 110 billion cell human computer. As Robert A. Heinlein writes, a human being should be able to change a diaper, plan an invasion, butcher a hog, design a building, con a ship, write a sonic, balance accounts, build a wall, set a bone, comfort the dying, take orders, give orders, cooperate, act alone, solve an equation, analyze a new problem, pitch manure, program a computer, cook a tasty meal, fight efficiently, die gallantly. Specialization is for insects. But as long as we remain on the antique circuits, we are not very different from the insects. That is, just as the insects repeat their four-stage program, egg, larva, chrysalis, adult, from generation to generation, we repeat our four-stage cycle also. The antique circuits are genetically conservative. They ensure the survival and continuation of the species, but do no more. For future evolution, we must look to the futuristic circuits. It is sometimes mistakenly stated that there are no universal sexual taboos. This is not true. There is one omnipurpose taboo which exists in every tribe. That taboo stipulates that sexuality shall not be unregulated by the tribe. That is, even though no other taboos are universal, the taboo against living without taboos remains constant. Every tribe has its own set of verbots and thou shalt nots, but no tribe allows the individual to choose his or her own set. An American president may not marry his own sister if he wants to get reelected. An Egyptian pharaoh had to marry his own sister. Confronted by this moral relativism, many social scientists have failed to notice the invariable. Both the president and the pharaoh are expected to obey local rules. So are the Samoan, the Russian, the Eskimo, and the Cuban. Why is there this taboo against sexual self-definition and the self-actualization? Why is it that, while no two societies can agree on what is sexually good and sexually bad, every society thinks that it must make some definition? The answer is that our first humanoid symbolizing and conceptualizing ancestors were very ignorant, but not at all stupid. They were ignorant of the laws of genetics, but they were smart enough to suspect that such laws exist. Sperm-egg fusion is surrounded by violent taboos and fierce tribal conformity because the survival and future evolution of the gene pool depends upon which particular spermatozoa reaches which particular ovum. Etymologists confirm the Freudian theory that there are ancient linkages between the words for the sacred, the erotic, the obscene, the awe-inspiring, the awful, the divine, the thrilling. All of these are primitive, powerful physiological responses to the mysteries of sexual attraction, mating, reproduction, inheritance, genetic drift, future evolution. The earliest god forms found by archaeologists are pregnant goddesses and ichthyophallic gods. The most intolerant, bigoted, and recalcitrant of all prejudices, the very last to fade away after cosmopolitanizing contact with other tribes having different values, are the taboos concerning the right to reproduce. If one nation insists that the head of state must marry his sister and another insists that he must not, both are acting on the assumption that the right way must be found and rigorously enforced. There are unknowns in the area of sexual attraction. He likes her, but she doesn't like him. There are unknowns in the area of mating. A young couple can make love once and the woman becomes pregnant, yet another couple make love for 3 years and the woman remains barren. Very puzzling and frightening for primitives in New Guinea or New Jersey. There are unknowns in the area of reproduction. Why twins? Why 3 boys in one family and 3 girls in another? Why miscarriages and stillbirths? There are unknowns in the area of inheritance. Why doesn't my son look like me? Many a domesticated primate has wondered uneasily, leading to a great deal of paranoia and male chauvinism. There are unknowns in the area of genetic drift. Modern researchers recognize 12 or more variables, but still have more questions than answers. There are unknowns in the area of future evolution. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? The title of Gauguin's greatest painting is the basic ontological question. The totem pole, like the treatise on sociobiology, is an attempt to answer. Amid all these unknowns of sexual attraction, mating, reproduction, inheritance, genetic drift, future evolution, the shamans of every tribe try to establish guideposts to tribal gene pool survival. Thus, morality is invented. Sexual attraction, mating, reproduction, inheritance, genetic drift, and future evolution are all stochastic processes. That is, processes in which, out of a random series, some intelligence, or something that can be metaphorically conceived as an intelligence, is selecting a final outcome. That these stochastic processes overlap, as shown in our diagram, is intuitively obvious, and it is also obvious that the future is being selected every step of the way. Footnote. That the whole chain is intelligent or manifest intelligence is the Lamarckian heresy which Darwinians have never quite been able to kill. Every time it is buried, it rises again in new form. 2 most able recently arguments of the neo-Lamarckian or meta-Lamarckian position, which the reader is cordially urged to read, are Timothy Leary's The Intelligence Agents and Gregory Bateson's Mind and Nature. Taboo and morality are tribal attempts to govern the random element to select the desired future. Morality attempts to control the stochastic evolutionary process at 2 points: interfering between sexual attraction and sexual consummation, mating, by taboos and commandments, or else interfering between mating and reproduction. The latter case is represented by infanticide, a widespread birth control measure always justified by the local shamans on magical grounds, e.g., the infants selected for sacrifice are breech births, or birthmarked, or twins, or in some way stigmatized by the gods. The actual function of such practices, of course, is population control, and such customs are most common on isolated islands where runaway population would be a disaster. Similarly, the Judaic taboos functioned to channel all sexuality into increased population, since the ancient Jews were surrounded by large and pugnacious empires eager to conquer them. They needed more boys for soldiers and more girls to breed soldiers. The most idiotic and superstitious taboos, from the rationalist viewpoint, always had some function when invented. For instance, the most pointlessly elaborate non-genetic incest taboos, in which virtually everybody in the tribe becomes unavailable sexually to everybody else, force exogamy, marriage outside the tribe. This creates affectional alliances, family ties, between tribes and decreases warfare. Something like this primitive exogamy survived into very recent times, in the custom of marrying one royal family to another. Every form of morality is, of course, irksome on some level to everybody, because no individual ever has exactly the sexual imprint desired by the tribe. The more sophisticated totem cults, the higher religions, so dubbed by themselves, take account of this by the doctrine of atonement. In one form or another, this allows the individual to be ritually forgiven periodically for not being the perfect sexual robot decreed by tribal morality. This becomes hilarious only when one realizes that most of what domesticated primates are asking their priests to forgive them for consists of what Kinsey so accurately called normal mammalian behavior. Footnote. This only refers to the silly and inferior religions of other people, of course, and has no reference to the sublime truths of the reader's own religion. Time binding, the transmission of symbols and tools across generations, begins on the third circuit. Acute consciousness of time is, however, intensified on the fourth circuit. The principal function of the socio-sexual circuit in the higher primates is to form an adult personality, a parent. Footnote. Homosexuality, like left-handedness, is probably included in the genetic script to serve auxiliary functions. In most primitive societies, the homosexuals and the left-handed are shunted into shamanic roles. In more complex societies, they are, like Spencer's and heterosexual bachelors, usually shunted into intellectual or artistic roles, which have quasi-shamanic functions of making, breaking, or transforming cultural signals. Those who claim any perennial sexual variation is against nature are underestimating nature's variety, diversity, and economy. The mutation of Leonardo da Vinci, a left-handed homosexual, was needed to break up the signal of the dying medieval reality tunnel and remake our perceptions into the reality tunnel of post-Renaissance scientific humanism. His success is registered by the fact that a Leonardo painting is still the norm of what we mean by realism, i.e., most people, including right-handed heterosexuals, are living in the scientific humanist space this man invented. By definition, the parent is the one who cares for the young of the species. By genetic necessity, the parent also cares about the young. In symbolizing humans, this means planning, hoping, and having aspirations. In the language of the mystics, this means being attached and trapped on the wheel of karma. The first effort in most mystical traditions is to break this fourth circuit attachment by taking a vow of celibacy. The fourth circuit is located in the left neocortex, the newest part of the left hemisphere of the brain. It is linked neurologically with the genitalia and the breasts, fucking, hugging, embracing, protecting circuitry. Persons who take their heaviest imprint on this circuit are beautiful. That is, their entire body has received so many sexual transmitters from the brain that they are constantly radiating the attractive mating signals that make up our perception of what is beautiful in a human being. According to accidents of imprinting, they can be coldly calculating exploiters, totally repressed Puritans, or carry some other negative traits, but they always look like, send the signals of, the ideal fucker, lover, protector. Once formulated, morality serves as not only a check on genetic drift, but a brake against Circuit 3 innovation. The shamans, priests, etc. define which ideas are moral and which are immoral. Anything new, anything that will break the tribal cycle, i.e. take us out of cyclical myth time into linear, progressive, revolutionary time, is usually defined very quickly as immoral. To say that religion and priestcraft have played a conservative role in history is an understatement. One might as well say that bubonic plague has killed a few people or that Hitler was a little bit strange. The chief role of religion has always been reactionary. This is its evolutionary function in the dialectic of the circuitry of the brain. Circuit 3 unchecked is like a cocaine monologue. You can't remember anything because everything is changing too fast. This is profoundly disorienting to the average domesticated primate, so the tribal moralists keep stability and tranquility by acting as decelerators. The average person, similarly, is philosophically most open and curious before the adult sexual of parenthood is elected. After reproduction, there is little time for Circuit 3 speculations, and because of the sanctions every tribe places upon heresy, i.e. new ideas, there is also little inclination. Thus, Circuit 3 tends to take us out of tribal cyclical time into linear progressive time, but Circuit 4 loops us back into the cycle again. Homosexuals may or may not be the chief creators of cultural innovation, as some gay pride advocates claim, but it is certainly true that they have done more than their share. The reason? They are not trapped into parent roles. These 4 circuits are coded, with 4 permutations of each, into the court cards of the tarot deck. Thus, the Knight of Discs, representing Earth according to the occultists, is the pure first circuit type, all sensation, all oral demand, all viscerotonic. Behind their alchemical, kabbalistic, theosophical jargon, most books on tarot are describing this type when they discuss this card. The pure undiluted mama's boy. The Queen of Discs, or Earth-Water, is a mixture of first and second circuit traits, sensational viscerotonic oral, and emotional egotistic political. You'd better be damned careful to call her Ms. The Prince of Discs, or Earth-Air, is a blend of first and third circuits, oral demand and rational calculation, probably a very sharp and sharkish lawyer. The Princess of Discs, or Earth-Fire, is the first circuit orality mixed with fourth circuit sexuality. This fusion of exhibitionism with inflamed eros means she's probably starring in porn movies. In all disc cards, the first circuit predominates over the others. The Queen of Cups, or Water, is emotion and territorial demand. Nelson Algren had her in mind when he said, "Never bed down with a woman who has more problems than you." The Knight of Cups, Water-Earth, is emotion plus sensation, the pure predator, marauder, thief, rapist, or sociopath. The Prince of Cups, or Water-Air, is emotion plus reason, the humanist, humanitarian, liberal, and ideal Unitarian minister. The Princess of Cups is Water-Fire, an explosive mixture of egotism and sexuality, Scarlett O'Hara, the femme fatale. The Prince of Swords is Air, all pure undiluted intellect. His feet never touch the earth, he lives amid floating abstractions, the monk scholar. The Knight of Swords is Earth, reason and oral exhibitionism, the actor, orator, demagogue, sometimes the artist. The Queen of Swords is Water, reason plus emotion. The greats in science and art are generally of this imprint group. The Princess of Swords is Fire, reason and sexuality, the good parent, usually the Puritan, but sometimes the crusader for sexual freedom. In any case, the motivating drive is an attempt to impose abstract reason upon the genetic imperatives of the mating urge. The Princess of Wands is Fire, sexuality at its most powerful. These types are usually, but not necessarily, quite promiscuous. Sometimes they pour all their erotic energy into one mate and raise huge families, parenting becoming a strong part of the Fourth Circuit. E.g., J.S. Bach, who may have written the sexiest music in history, had 20 children. The Knight of Wands is Fire-Earth, sexuality and sensationalism, the playboy, Reich's phallic narcissist. The Prince of Wands is Fire-Air, sexuality plus reason. These types are likely to get involved in the kind of empirical mysticism that is not tolerated by the local authorities, e.g. the Tantrists in India, the Knights Templar, and witches in medieval Europe. Aleister Crowley and Wilhelm Reich most recently. Crowley said this card was a portrait of his true self. The Queen of Wands is Fire-Water, sexuality and emotional politics. The law courts have a steady parade of this type passing through every day. The clever Kabbalists who designed this pictorial key to the 4 primitive circuits included a clue to higher consciousness, for they teach that each element in traditional alchemy, earth, air, fire, and water, corresponds to one of these tarot suits, discs and swords, wands, cups, and to one of the letters in the holy unspeakable name of God, YHVH. The correspondences are as follows. Y, fire, wands, circuit 4. H, water, cups, circuit 2. V, air, swords, circuit 3. H, earth, discs, circuit 1. The logic of this imagery is quite clear to the unconscious mind, and these associations appear frequently in dreams, as Jung documented in Psychology and Alchemy. The aim of the Kabbalah is to make the microcosm mirror the macrocosm, that is, to make the human being a perfect image of God. This means putting together the 4 alchemical elements symbolized by the letters YHVH, in other words, bringing the 4 circuits into balance. This is the same lesson as taught in the Buddhist mandalas with 4 demons at the corners and the circle representing awakening in the middle. The married look, the mom and dad look, etc., which are not scientific concepts but which everybody can recognize at once, have to do with an acute time sense. The parent is concerned not just with acquiring biosurvival tickets for personal nurture, but with acquiring tickets for the young and for the future. Behaviorists tell us wonderful stories about the intricate patterns that can be conditioned into experimental animals. See, they say we have, by selective reinforcement, trained this rat so that at the sound of a bell he runs up a ladder, presses button A, races across a plank and down another ladder, presses button B, dashes across the cage, and waits at the food slot for his meal to arrive. Lest anybody think this book is written from a perch of superiority, consider the similar but more complex behavior which the author followed for 20 years. He would set an alarm clock before sleep every night. When the alarm woke him, he would breakfast hurriedly, rush off to catch a bus, ride to a subway, change to the train, ride to an office building, rush to the lobby, board an elevator, ride to a certain floor, enter an office, and toil at repetitious and generally pointless tasks for 8 hours. This behavior sequence had been shaped, as B.F. Skinner would say, by reinforcement delivered every second week in the form of biosurvival tickets, money. These tickets were necessary to the biosurvival of 4 dependent children. The reader of this book can probably remember, somewhat dimly, the imprinting and conditioning of each of these circuits. We all began as infants in a one-dimensional world, orally hooked to mommy. The further away from mommy we crawled, the greater was our biosurvival and anxiety, and we generally returned to mommy as quickly as possible. The key imprint incidents of this period, together with associated conditioning, determine concretely how much we presently exhibit of anxiety or self-confidence, rootedness or explorativeness, dependency or independence. Then, when the DNA sent the appropriate RNA messenger molecules to the glands, endocrine system, etc., a mutation occurred. Our gross morphology, our whole body, changed, and our minds changed in the process. That is, our reality tunnel dilated into 2 dimensions. When we rose up and began to walk about the house and started learning who we could dominate, who could dominate us, who could be dominated, emotionally bullied at some times and not at others, etc. We developed out of amorphous biosurvival consciousness into stubborn individual ego. We were imprinted and conditioned with a particular style of emotional territorial politics. At this stage, we were imprinted and conditioned for dominance or submission, self-confidence or self-doubt, strong ego or weak ego, high pack status or low pack status, giving orders or taking orders, Herren moral or Sklav moral. We were subsequently conditioned to switch between these reflexes depending on whether the person we were dealing with was higher in the pecking order or lower in the pecking order. Middle-class people, e.g. Reagan conservatives, John Birchers, etc., will always revere those higher in the pecking order and, equally, will always have some reason to persecute or peck at the poor, who are lower in the pecking order. Hence they will say and even believe that they are being robbed by the poor on welfare, who get about 4% of the tax dollar, and never notice that the military-industrial complex is getting 72% of their tax dollar. This is normal mammalian sociobiology. After this second circuit reality tunnel is wired in, the organism molts and mutates again into the verbal stage, and a third circuit style of mentation is imprinted. That is, on top of protoplasmatic consciousness and mammalian ego, we acquire human mind, which is created by and creator of human artifacts and speech. Feral children who survive in isolation from human society, artifacts and speech, have no mind in the human sense, which is why they are called feral. In the semantic stage of imprint vulnerability, we acquire either fluency or inarticulateness, dexterity or clumsiness, good mind or dumb mind. Asterisk. Why do we say dumb, mute, for stupid? Because a good mind means a good mouth, and the human mind is a verbalizing circuit. At puberty, another DNA trigger fires, and RNA messengers initiate another morphological mutation of body-mind. The adult personality is imprinted and conditioned. We become moral or immoral, robot obedient or robot disobedient, solid citizen or sexual outlaw, parent or anarchist. Lack of understanding of these morphological changes and their persistence in imprint circuits in the brain is responsible for most failures in communication and for the general sense of exasperation with which we too often confront each other. Since everybody's imprints are a little bit different, the average is that which nobody totally is. We all feel at times like the legendary Quaker who told his wife, "All the world is mad but me and thee, and sometimes I wonder about thee." Reichians, disciples of Dr. Spock and the Summerhill School, etc., have called attention with some impatience to the brutality and stupidity of many of our traditional child-rearing methods. These methods are brutal and stupid only if, like the above-mentioned heretics, one regards the goal of child-rearing as the production of a sane, balanced, creative, not created, human being. This has never been the goal of any society in the real world. The traditional child-rearing methods are quite logical, pragmatic, and sound in fulfilling the real purpose of society, which is not to create an ideal person, but to crate a semi-robot who mimics the society as closely as possible, both in its rational and its irrational aspects, both as the repository of the wisdom of the past and the sum total of all the cruelties and stupidities of the past. Very simply, a totally aware, alert, awakened, unbrainwashed person would not fit very well into any of the standard roles society offers. The damaged, robotized products of traditional child-rearing do fit into those slots. That is, there is a neurosociological logic to the illogical. Are traditional schools very much like mini prisons? Do they stifle imagination, cramp the child physically and mentally, and still run on various forms of overt or covert terrorism? Of course, the answer is an unambiguous yes, but such schools are necessary to train people for roles in the ordinary office or factory or profession, which are also very much like mini prisons, stifle imagination, cramp the person physically and mentally, and run on terror, threat of loss of biosurvival tickets in the form of paychecks or tenure. The permissive movement in child-rearing appeared only when it did, and has succeeded only to a limited extent, because society has always needed and still thinks it needs human robots. Utopian child-rearing will advance further necessarily only as society evolves out of its authoritarianism. That is, as the accelerated changes now occurring propel us into the most rapid period of social evolution in all of human history, we will then need citizens who are not robots, who are creative, who are not docile, who are innovative, who are not narrow-minded bigots, who are explorers in every sense of the word. Traditional child-rearing began to falter only when society began to enter into the present period of accelerated change and technological omnitransformation of all traditional values. Failures in communication generally derive from sending a message to the wrong address. That is, your husband has an ego problem and you send a message to his mind. Adapting a diagram from transactional analysis, what has happened is this. The message is addressed from circuit 1 to circuit 4. It means, I feel weak, help bolster me up. If the answer comes back from circuit 3 to circuit 3, well, yes, let's analyze the problem. There has been a wrong address. Of course, this example is deliberately untypical, although not impossible. It is untypical because women traditionally are trained not to make this kind of mistake, to be emotionally sensitive, to be supportive, etc. It is much more likely statistically that this kind of wrong address will go to the other way, husband to wife. That is, the wife signals help, and the husband on circuit 3 says, let's analyze the problem. We have said that the imprinting of the circuits contains a large element of accident within genetic parameters. Society everywhere, without understanding this theory, understands enough pragmatically about imprinting processes to attempt to program each individual for his or her assigned role. Hence, traditional girl rearing is different from traditional boy rearing, so that women will have a more circuit 2 sensitivity. Again, women's liberation, like modern child rearing, arrived only when we were evolutionary ready or nearly ready for it. The traditional system worked in traditional societies. Similarly, class structure, like the caste structure in an insect hive, works to produce the right imprints in each class. The third circuit of the servile class or proletariat is imprinted chiefly for manual dexterity, while the same circuit in middle class or ruling class children is imprinted for verbal, mathematical, or other symbol-using skills. Democracy has been less than a total success, and the intellectuals' half-shamed cynicism about democracy is justified to the extent that traditional society did not need, could not use, and in many ways discouraged the development of high verbal, rational skills in the majority of the population. That is, concretely, most people are not encouraged to be very smart, and are rather heavily programmed to be comparatively stupid. Such programming is what is needed to fit them into most traditional jobs. Their biosurvival circuitry works as well as that of most animals. Their emotional territorial circuitry is typically primate, and they have little third circuit mind to verbalize or rationalize with. Naturally, they usually vote for the charlatan who can activate primitive biosurvival fears and territorial patriotic pugnacity. The intellectual looks at the dismal results and continues to believe in democracy only by an act of blind faith, similar to the way beliefs in Catholicism or communism or snake worship are maintained. Again, the traditional system works for traditional society. A mass made of people who have intense curiosity about why Beethoven went in for string quartets after the Ninth Symphony, or whether Kant really refuted Hume satisfactorily, or what the latest quantum theories mean in relation to determinism and free will, is not a mass that will easily be led into dull, dehumanizing labor at traditional jobs. Why did Adlai Stevenson lose to Ike Eisenhower, George McGovern to Tricky Dicky Nixon, etc.? It was the wrong address problem again. Stevenson, McGovern, and other darlings of the intelligentsia were speaking to the Third Circuit, which is not very highly developed in most domesticated primates yet. Eisenhower, in his fatherly way, and Nixon, in his bullying Big Brother way, knew just how to push the right Second Circuit emotional territorial buttons to get a mob of primates to follow them. They were genetically programmed alpha males in ethnological terms. Similarly, the moralist, i.e. the adult personality who has imprinted heavy ethical imperatives on Circuit 4, is often totally unable to communicate with the scientist or technologist. The moralist may even decide, many already have, that the scientist per se is inhuman. In fact, morals are fairly irrelevant to the Third Circuit analytical mind, which is the brain function the average scientist has imprinted most powerfully. To the Third Circuit, the only morality is accuracy, the only immorality is sloppy thinking. Again, the rise in social conscience among scientists is happening only when it was evolutionary necessary that it happen, i.e. after Hiroshima. If it doesn't seem to be happening widely enough and quickly enough, well, the same can be said, also in error, I think, about modernizing education and child rearing, about women's liberation, about racism, etc. The rebellion against all the follies of the past is succeeding, and will continue to succeed only as we evolve into a society which needs each human to function well on all circuits. We are moving with ever-increasing speed into such a society. What the impatient radical forgets is that many of the injustices of the traditional primate society were not even perceived as such by the best minds of 1,000 years ago or 100 years ago, or in the case of institutionalized sexism, even 20 years ago. If we can see injustice and absurdity in many age-old institutions, it is only because we are evolving out of robothood at precisely the point in evolution when it is necessary for us to become smarter and more sensitive on all circuits. Each of us has a favorite circuit, that is, a circuit that has been more heavily imprinted than the others. Miscommunication, misunderstanding, and general misjudgment of one another is vastly increased by the fact that few of us know about these levels of circuitry, and we all tend to assume that the person we are interacting with is on the same circuit we are. Thus, there are narcissistic or oral first circuit types in every social group. Present them with a problem, then they will immediately look for somebody else to handle it, since the oral stage is robotically imprinted for dependency. Or if they have imprinted hostile weakness instead of dependent weakness, they will explode into anger, infantile tantrum, raging that a problem exists and it has been imposed on them. A second circuit type, in the same situation, will attempt to frighten the problem away by barking and blustering at it, mammalian fashion. A third circuit type will try to reason out the problem. This is the best approach only with problems that are themselves rational, i.e., how do you make this machine work? It can be blind and futile when the problem is another human being acting out one of the more destructive second circuit rage programs. The liberal is the one who leaves the room when the fight starts, somebody once said. Third circuit types are most confused and feel impotent when second circuit mammalian politics takes over the scene. A fourth circuit type will try to be rational, third circuit, and to sense the emotional dimensions of the problem, second circuit, but will basically try to impose a moral solution. Now this is the decent, fair thing to do. This may or may not make sense to the third circuit rationalist looking for objective justice, and will usually make no sense at all to the totally second circuit type dominated by emotionalism and territoriality. What is true of the group is true of the individual. While we all have our favorite circuit and tend to see that circuit as superior to all the others, we can be pushed out of it by shocks or stresses, in which case we jump to another circuit. The most robotic rationalist will descend to the first circuit, eventually, if threat to biosecurity is forcibly enough presented on the screen of consciousness. And if prevented from leaving the room when the fight starts, the rationalist will even descend to second circuit mammalian howling and barking, under sufficient pressure. Oliver Wendell Holmes referred to this as the hydrostatic principle in controversy, whereby the fools drag everybody down to their own level. The most robotic emotionalist may also move up to the third circuit temporarily if a problem remains intractable to every form of emotional bullying or con artistry. All of us will move into fourth circuit parent role or superego. Even little children will do it imitatively, if it seems that the only way to get what one wants is to appeal to tribal morality. Why, it would be positively indecent not to do it the way grandfather would. Give us the child until he is 5, and we will have him for life, bragged some 18th century Jesuit. The Jesuit order of that time, as Aldous Huxley later noted sardonically, educated Voltaire, Diderot, and Marquis de Sade. Obviously, their techniques of brain programming were not perfect. Nonetheless, most people in most societies do grow up as fairly accurate replicas of the previous generation. Most children educated by the Jesuits have remained Catholics. Most children of Democrats do not become Republicans, etc. Considering the wide variety of philosophies available to any of us, nudism and Buddhism, scientific materialism and snake worship, communism and vegetarianism, subjective idealism and existentialism, Methodism and Shinto, etc., the fact that most people remain in the same reality tunnel as their parents does indicate that acculturalization is a mind control process. We are all giants raised by pygmies who have learned to walk with a perpetual mental crouch. Unleashing in our full stature, our total brain power, is what this book is all about. There is a Zen story, very funny, haha, about a monk who, having failed to achieve enlightenment, brain change, through the normal Zen methods, was told by his teacher to think of nothing but an ox. Day after day after day, the monk thought of the ox, visualized the ox, meditated on the ox. Finally, one day, the teacher came to the monk's cell and said, "Come out here, I want to talk to you." "I can't get out," the monk said. "My horns won't fit through the door." "I can't get out." At these words, the monk was enlightened. Never mind what enlightenment means now. The monk went through some species of brain change, obviously. He had developed the delusion that he was an ox, and awakening from that hypnoidal state, he saw through the mechanism of all other delusions and how they roboticize us. Exercises. Recreate vividly in imagination your first orgasm. To what extent do you still use the same accessories or stimuli to turn you on? 2. Try to change your sexual imprint. See if you can reach orgasm by some method that has been taboo or unthinkable to you before. 3. Imagine that you are Reverend Jerry Falwell. Explain to an imaginary homosexual why his sexual imprint is sinful and should be changed at once. Include instructions on how to change it. 4. Imagine that you are a gay man or lesbian. Explain to Reverend Falwell why you will not or cannot change your sexual imprint to please him. 5. Read Margaret Mead's Sex and Temperament in 3 Primitive Societies. Then write a 5-page proof that the taboos in our tribe make more sense objectively than the taboos of the tribe she studied. Be serious about it. 6. Choose the viewpoint of the Samoans in Dr. Mead's book above. Write a 5-page proof that their taboos make more sense than those of our society. Be serious about it. 7. Reread the paragraphs about the giraffe and the gosling. What does this tell you about your sexual imprint? What is your Jeep or your ping pong ball? Circuit number 5, the holistic neurosomatic circuit. The word psychosomatic has been around long enough to be generally understood. Unfortunately, it is another semantic spook. The concept of psyche or soul was borrowed from the theologians, who, being bankrupt, are in no position to lend anything. What we know and experience, our tunnel reality, is what registers on the brain and nervous system. The phenomena of faith healing, regeneration, rejuvenation, bliss, ecstasy, rapture, etc., have been occurring for many thousands of years, all in known cultures. In the pre-scientific language of yesterday's psychology would we refer to such events as psychosomatic. In our deliberately modernistic and almost sci-fi jargon, we would prefer to call them neurosomatic. The neurosomatic circuit of the brain is much more recent than the antique circuits previously discussed. It does not manifest in all human beings and appears late in life, usually to those who do activate it and imprint it. Temporary neurosomatic consciousness can be acquired by A, the yoga practice of pranayama breathing, and B, for those who can handle it, by ingestion of cannabis drugs such as hashish and marijuana, which trigger neurotransmitters that activate this circuit. Of the former device, pranayama, Aleister Crowley, certainly the most skeptical of all mystics, writes forcefully, "For mind and body alike, there is no purgative like pranayama, no purgative like pranayama. For mind and body alike, for mind and body alike, alike! There is no purgative like pranayama, pranayama, pranayama. Yea, for mind and body alike, there is no purgative, no purgative, no purgative, for mind and body alike, no purgative like pranayama." If this is not emphatic enough, Crowley adds elsewhere, pranayama is notably useful in quieting the emotions and appetites. Digestive troubles in particular are very easy to remove in this way. It purifies both the body and the mind and should be practiced certainly never less than 1 hour daily by the serious student. To which he adds a footnote. Emphatically, it is impossible to combine pranayama properly performed with emotional thought, second circuit reflexes, Robert Anton Wilson. It should be resorted to immediately at all times during life when calm is threatened. This is very strong stuff for the mystic who filled his books with jokes and jeers, and who always told his students not believe me, but don't believe me. About pranayama, for once in his life, Crowley was serious. In the experience of this author, pranayama will remove all forms of depression, including profound grief and bereavement. It will soothe anger and remove resentments. It seems beneficial to all minor health problems and, occasionally, major health problems. Hindus, who are professionals at pranayama, claim a great deal more, such as immunity to pain of all sorts, samadhi, union with God, levitation, etc. Most notably, pranayama creates neurosomatic turn-on, sensory enrichment, sensual bliss, perceptual delight, and a general laid-back hedonic high. Similar effects are produced by voluntary association in a lily tank by zero gravity. The astronaut's mystical experiences are all of this neurosomatic variety, and for the judicious or lucky, cannabis drugs, as said above. Negative neurosomatic circuit effects are experienced by amateur yogis, by many potheads, and by a large number of schizophrenics. The neurosomatic feedback loop in these unfortunate cases reverses the above description. Sensory experience becomes unpleasant, any sound or touch is painful, sensuality turns into acute discomfort with the entire body, perceptions warp into nightmare, and general anxiety is imprinted. Light is particularly terrifying and painful, often associated with hell or with death ray machines manipulated by unscrupulous enemies. Gopi Krishna, a Hindu bureaucrat who took up yoga originally only for health reasons, was abruptly catapulted into a negative neurosomatic state for several years. All sensations were so painful that he many times thought he would die. The details in his autobiography, Kundalini, are pathetic and sound much like schizophrenia. He came out of this finally, entered a positive neurosomatic state, and has been writing blissful books about the perfection of the all, typical of this circuit, ever since. Nikola Tesla, the Yugoslav genius, went through the same hell or schizoid state without yoga in his teens. He came out of the horrors with the scientific theory of alternating currents worked out, a belief in extrasensory perception, a superhuman memory, and a streak of visionary humanitarianism that led him into continuous conflicts with the corporations that financed his more than 100 major electrical inventions. He earned over $1 million before the age of 30 at a time when $1 million was a lot of money, and he died broke trying to sell an invention that he said would abolish poverty. Most shamans and many mystics have been through similar negative to positive neurosomatic sensitization. Christian scientists called it chemicalization. St. John of the Cross called it, poetically, the dark night of the soul. Kabbalists called it crossing the abyss. In Kazanatsky's The Odyssey, a modern sequel, Odysseus sees a statue which seems to him urgently meaningful. The statue was Kazanatsky's symbol for the evolution of these circuits, which have been known more or less in various symbolisms for a few thousand years, e.g. the 7 souls of the Egyptians, the 10 lights of the Kabbalists, etc. The Kazanzaki's statue shows an animal, circuit 1, a warrior above the animal, circuit 2, a scholar above the warrior, circuit 3, a lover, circuit 4, a face in agony, chemicalization, the dark night of the soul, the crossing of the abyss, which equals the entry into Circuit 5 the hard way, a face in bliss, successful Circuit 5 re-imprinting, and a man turning into pure spirit, Circuit 6. Circuit 7 is missing in the schemata, as Circuit 7 is missing in Jung, and everything above Circuit 3 is missing in Carl Sagan. Some lucky souls jump to Circuit 5 bliss without passing through the horrors of chemicalization and the dark night of the soul. The neurosomatic circuit is polymorphous perverse in Freud's unappetizing terminology. This means that the nervous system itself, taking over as driver, is now directing the rest of the body. Every act becomes an orgasm, said Aleister Crowley, giving his own tantric emphasis to the polymorphous nature of this circuit. The lives of the saints are full of stories which seem miracles to the four-circuited majority, or are rejected as lies, hoaxes, yarns by the three-circuited dogmatic rationalists, but which seem perfectly normal from the viewpoint of 5-circuited polymorphous consciousness. The saint says he is in rapture and full of gratitude to God for giving him such a feast for dinner as plain bread and water. Of course, many a pothead will understand that degree of neurosomatic rapture. The guru comes into the room and his bioenergy has such a charge that a cripple jumps up and is healed. The cripple merely acquired neurosomatic turn-on by contact, as some people get contact high when others are on drugs. The firewalkers in many shamanic traditions walk on the fire, as they tell inquiring anthropologists, to prove their control over the spirit, i.e. to demonstrate to themselves and others that they have achieved high-quality neurosomatic tuning. One faith healer told the present author, "Most people die of adrenaline poisoning. In our terminology, most people have too much first-circuit anxiety and second-circuit territorial pugnacity for their own good. They are literally struggling for survival as no other animals do, despite Darwin. Most animals simply play most of the time, solve problems of survival when they have to, or die of not solving the problems. Only humans are conscious of struggling, and hence worried and depressed about the game of life." The faith healer went on, "What cures them is realizing that I'm not afraid. That is, contact with a fifth circuit personality, a person who controls his or her own circuit 2 adrenaline trips, can be a catalyst, throwing the sufferer upward into a personal fifth circuit experience. The avant-garde 20% of the population, due to the consciousness movement, a secularization of much ancient shamanic wisdom, already understands every wild idea in the last few pages. They have had enough neurosomatic experience to know that they were once totally robotized, as most people still are, and are knowingly engaged in acquiring more neurosomatic knowledge. When this reaches 51% of the population, a major historical revolution will have occurred, as profound as the life extension revolution." Footnote. Please reread this sentence and think about it. In McLuhan's terms, the Fifth Circuit is nonlinear and global, that is, not limited by the one thing at a time sequences of the semantic circuit. It thinks in gestalts. This is why it is so often connected with intuition, which is a way of thinking between and around data points on the perceptual screen, sensing what total field the points must be part of. The great musician has developed a remarkable feedback between Fifth Circuit gestalting and the Third Circuit function of coding such coherent structures into the inspired symbolism of music. Music always leads to some tight brain activity in listeners, and the Fifth Circuit is almost certainly located in the right brain hemisphere. Beethoven, we remember, was left-handed. Since the left hand is neurologically linked to the polymorphous right brain, one might say he was genetically inclined to right brain activities, that is, to sensing coherent wholes, to plunging into neurosomatic bliss almost at will, and to sensory, sensual, rapturous, and rapture. Everyone knows that the Sixth Symphony is pantheistic, but whether Beethoven was an ideological pantheist or not, that way of responding to nature is normal and natural, right brain circuit 5 functioning. That is, anybody on the Fifth Circuit will talk like a pantheist, whether or not he has developed a philosophy about pantheism. The miracle of Beethoven is not that he felt the universe that way. A few thousand Fifth Circuit types throughout history have also felt and sensed nature that way, but that he mastered the Third Circuit art of music with such skill that he could communicate such experiences, which is precisely what the ordinary mystic cannot do. The neurosomatic circuit probably began to appear around 30,000 years ago. That is the conclusion of Barbara Honegger, who has made a profound study of European cave paintings, coming to the conclusion that many of them show exercises to increase right brain activity similar to those still used in surviving shamanic and yogic traditions. This Fifth Circuit is bonded into the right cortex and neurologically linked to the limbic First Circuit system and the genitalia. These neural links explain the sexual metaphor of kundalini or serpent energy used to describe the circuit in systems as varied as Indian Tantra, Gnosticism, and Voodoo, and the Chinese yin-yang, male-female, energies associated with it. Prolonged sexual play without orgasm always triggers some Circuit 5 consciousness. It is quite easy to determine if the Fifth Circuit has been activated successfully or not. How often does a person go to a doctor? If a mind researcher is glowing rather than grayish, bouncy rather than draggy, if he or she has a sparkle, and if he or she virtually never goes to a doctor, the neurosomatic circuit has been mastered. As Mary Baker Eddy once wrote, thereby making herself hugely unpopular with those who love to talk of matters mystical but have no empirical knowledge, "The Word was made flesh. Divine truth must be known by its effects on the body as well as on the mind." There is no tribe known to anthropology which doesn't have at least one neurosomatic technician, shaman. Large-scale outbursts of neurosomatic consciousness have occurred frequently in all the major historical periods, usually being stamped out quickly by the local branch of the Inquisition or the AMA. Other outbursts have been co-opted and diluted. As we read in the New Testament, "And when he had called into him his 12 disciples, he gave them power against unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal all manner of sickness and all manner of disease. And as ye go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out devils. Freely have ye received, freely give." Matt chapter 10, verses 1 through 8. It may or may not have happened exactly like that. As Mark Twain would say, there might be a few stretchers in there. But something like this, however much the evangelist may exaggerate it, must have happened to account for Christianity's rapid triumph over other but probably less effective systems of opening the Fifth Circuit. Mithraism, the Eleusinian cult at Athens, the Dionysic cults, etc., all had age-old shamanistic techniques for inducing their neurosomatic rapture. Christianity at first seems to have been superior in creating neurosomatic control. In St. Paul's metaphor, the old Adam, circuits 1 through 4, got bleached out, and the new Adam, circuit 5, took over as the center of consciousness and self-government. In another metaphor, the body became the flexible clay, and the awakened, illuminated brain became the sculptor. In general, Fourth Circuit problems take the form of guilt. I cannot do what I am supposed to do. Third Circuit problems take the form of perplexity. I cannot understand how I got into this mess or how to get out of it, or what is expected of me, etc. Second Circuit problems take the form of bullying or cowardice. I will force them, or I will surrender and let them force me. First Circuit problems take the form of body symptoms. I feel rotten all over, gradually centering in, under enough stress, on one acute disabling symptom. Footnote. This last is Eric Burns' wooden leg game, which asks to be relieved of social participation or interaction on the grounds of being physically hors de combat. Fifth Circuit neurosomatic consciousness bleaches out all these problems at once. The disappearance of First Circuit physical illnesses only seems more miraculous than the transcendence of Second Circuit emotionalism, Third Circuit perplexity, and Fourth Circuit guilt. It is the Cartesian mind-body dualism that makes us think of such First Circuit physical cures as somehow stranger or more spooky than any rapid improvement on the other circuits. One of the intents of our terminology is precisely to transcend that Cartesian dualism, making all the circuits equally comprehensible within one context. The robotized rationalist fears and resents Circuit 5 rapture and its holistic intuitive faculties, just as the robotized emotionalist fears and resents Circuit 3 reason. Thus, when the neurosomatic circuit feedback begins to function and the mutated Circuit 5 person tries to describe his or her rapture and at oneness, the rationalist hastily mutters that this is merely subjective. Misery is merely subjective too, but that doesn't keep it from hurting. The neurosomatic skill of transmuting all experience so that one is high and happy in a situation where the force-circuited majority would be miserable is worth learning for the very simple egotistic reason that it's more fun to be happy than to be in agony. It is also socially beneficial, because, as some 1960s sage remarked, you can't do good until you feel good. Just as misery loves company, the high and happy want everybody else to be high and happy. This first lesson the Fifth Circuit adept has to learn to control is to control this upsurge of altruism and not make a nuisance of oneself by trying to force everybody to be happy. The rationalist is even more alarmed by the results of prolonged Fifth Circuit bliss, which includes the ability to heal a wide variety of diseases both in oneself and in others. Even the well-documented current research on endorphins, which gives us the beginning of a neurochemical explanation on how such healings operate, is regarded with discomfort or hostility by the more robotized rationalists. It all sounds metaphysical, and therefore it cannot exist. Footnote: endorphins are neurotransmitters that trigger Circuit 5. They can be activated by cannabis drugs, psychedelics, meditation, pranayama, or visualization of white light. The last is the most common system used by faith healers and was known to the medieval Rosicrucians. There is nothing supernatural about the Fifth Circuit. It merely appears supernatural by comparison to the earlier circuits, but the Third Circuit, of which the rationalist is so proud, undoubtedly appeared supernatural when it first appeared. The Egyptians attributed speech and writing, Third Circuit functions, to divine intervention by the god Thoth. The Fifth Circuit, like the earlier circuits, is just another evolutionary mutation, necessary to us as we move toward a more complex neurosocial level. It's just like ordinary life, except that you're always a foot above the ground, says an old Zen proverb. This floating aspect of the Fifth Circuit is preparing us for extraterrestrial migration. One of the most interesting neurosomatic adepts in all history, from the viewpoint of the President theory, was Mary Baker Eddy. Precisely because Mrs. Eddy was fundamentally naive and unaware of most of philosophy, she never realized that you cannot speak or write about the ineffable. She therefore wrote about it at length. If her writings are hard to decipher, if they often sound like the ravings of a disordered mind, Aleister Crowley's description of mystic writings, including his own, they also have moments of astonishing lucidity. For instance, she knew and wrote with total clarity that illness is fear, and love is its cure. Most psychologists are just beginning to comprehend that today, over 100 years later. Perfect love casteth out fear, and that is how neurosomatic awakening cures disease. As Mrs. Eddy told one inquirer, love, 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 that's all you have to know to be a healer. 60 years later, unheeded by most of his profession, a Scottish psychiatrist, Ian Suddy, wrote that the physician's love heals the patient. Another quote from Mrs. Eddy is appropriate at this point. When understanding changes, we shall gain the reality of life, the control of soul over sense. This must be the climax before harmonious and immortal man is obtained and his capabilities revealed. To the ordinary, scientifically educated reader, this is metaphysical gibberish. Let us try to retranslate it into our own neurological metaphors. When the brain develops its full potentials, we shall gain a new view of life and the control of neurosomatic bliss over lower circuit guilts, perplexities, emotions, and body symptoms. This is evolutionarily scheduled to occur before Sixth Circuit evolutionary awareness and physical immortality are achieved. We suggest that Mrs. Eddy, having activated a large part of the right brain hemisphere, was able to think in gestalt as well as serving as transmitter of neurosomatic healing to others. She was looking down the DNA highway to the scientific breakthroughs of the decade in which we now live. Many have turned on the neurosomatic circuit due to prolonged illness, especially if they grow impatient with doctors and resort to self-medication and or faith healing. The bathroom of Nietzsche, according to Stefan Zweig, looked like a pharmacy shop due to the large number of drugs and medicines with which the philosopher treated his chronic migraines. Gurdjieff employed cocaine, hashish, and yoga techniques, probably including pranayama, to treat the incessant and increasing pains resultant from his war wounds and 2 car accidents. The harshness of these 2 philosophers in their contempt for ordinary human suffering, their visions of the superhuman state beyond emotion and pain, all probably derived from neurosomatic turn-ons alternating with acute pain. That is, they experienced the whole of evolution from the lower circuits to the full development of neurosomatic bliss, and were expressing chiefly contempt for their own relapses into less than blissful consciousness. In the East, the control of the neurosomatic circuit is known as dhyana, Cha'an, or Zen. The state is sometimes called Buddha mind or Buddha body. To the ancient Greeks, where rituals to achieve it with psychedelic drugs were performed yearly at Eleusis, those who accomplished the ritual successfully were called Diogenes, twice born. The metaphor lingers in the born-again terminology of charismatic Christianity and is symbolized by the myth of the resurrection of the body. Freud recognized this state vaguely as the oceanic experience. Gurdjieff calls this circuit the magnetic center. Faith healers and adepts of a few yogic schools seem to live in neurosomatic consciousness permanently. Most who achieved it all tend to have it only in flashes, as noted by Ezra Pound. Le paradis n'est pas artificiel, but is jagged for a flash for an hour, then agony for an hour. This paradis, this condition of neurosomatic mind-body peace, should be considered a new brain circuit toward which all humanity is evolving slowly and painfully out of mammalian antique circuits. This progression from primate emotion to post-hominid tranquility, from man to superman, is the next step that mystics forever talk of. You can hear it in most of Beethoven's later major compositions. As mentioned before, governmental brainwashers are generally too puritanical to handle or manhandle the socio-sexual circuit and content themselves with mind-washing and brain programming on the biosurvival, emotional, and semantic circuits, while outlaw bands like the SLA or Mansonoids go further and reprint the socio-sexual circuit also. It is necessary to note that some cults presently active on this backward planet go even further than that and engage in neurosomatic brainwashing. A permanent neurosomatic circuit can only be imprinted by prolonged practice of one of the yogic, tantric, or related sciences, and perhaps good genes, good environments, and good luck generally. Neurosomatic brainwashing, the most powerful form of robotization, consists in temporary activation of the neurosomatic circuit by the brainwasher, together with assurances that only the brainwasher, or the god who acts through him, can turn on this circuit. For full effect, this is of course preceded by normal brainwashing. The victim is first isolated from his or her previous environment and is trained to hook the biosurvival circuit onto the guru and or the ashram or commune. The emotional circuit is bent and broken by continuous attacks upon status, ego, until the emotional security left is only found in total submission to the group reality island. The re-infantilized victim is then ready to imprint any semantic circuitry desired, from EST to Krishna to People's Temple, etc. The socio-sexual circuit then can easily be programmed for celibacy, for free love, or for whatever sexual game the guru has selected. Then and only then, the neurosomatic buttons are pushed and ecstasy is given to the subject by the guru. Marjo Gortner, a longtime practitioner of this science, commented ironically in a film made after abandoning it for a different career, "The marks never realized they could do it, push the neurosomatic buttons, for themselves. They all think they need me jacking them off." Gortner is, nowadays, unusually honest. The average charismatic insists that the victims can never learn to do it for themselves. One of the greatest historical practitioners of this neuroscience was Hassani Sabah, who used relatively simple techniques, including, evidently, a time-release capsule invented by the Sufi College of Wisdom in Cairo. As I describe Hassan's technique, based on historical records in my novel The Trick Top Hat, 2 young candidates dine with Hassan. The food is laced with a time-release capsule. When asleep, the candidates are taken to Hassan's famous Garden of Delights. The capsule had released a heavy dose of opium, and they were quite thoroughly unconscious and unaware of their surroundings. The garden, officially known as the Garden of Delights, covered several acres. Here candidates were prepared for admission to the Order of the Assassins. They were to become the most feared and legendary professional killers in history. But here also in the same garden were prepared candidates for admission to the Brotherhood of Light, the Illuminati. The candidates in fact were prepared the same way. They themselves selected, unknown to themselves, which order they would enter, the political assassins or the mystical Illuminati. Both young men were conveyed into the Garden of Delights and placed several acres apart from each other. In a short time, the second stage of the time-release capsule began to work. Cocaine was released into their bloodstreams, thereby overwhelming the traces of the sopophoric opium and causing them to awaken full of energy and zest. At the same time as they awoke, hashish also began to be released, so that they saw everything with exceptional clarity and all colors were jewel-like, brilliant, divinely beautiful. A group of extremely comely and busty young ladies, imported from the most expensive brothel in Cairo, sat in a circle around each of the young candidates, playing flutes and other delicately sweet instruments of music. "Welcome to heaven," they sang as the awakening men gazed about them in wonder. "By the magic of the holy Lord Hassan, you have entered paradise while still alive." And they fed them paradise apples, oranges, far sweeter and stranger than the earth apples they had known before, and they showed them the animals of paradise, imported from as far away as Japan in some cases, creatures far more remarkable than those ordinarily seen in Afghanistan. "This is heaven," the first young man exclaimed in ecstasy. "Great is Allah, and great is the wide Lord Hassan Sabah." But 20 acres away, surrounded by similar lovely ladies and other wonders, the second young man merely gazed about him, smiling in contentment, and said nothing. And then, in both cases, the houris of paradise, as promised in the Quran, began to dance, and as they danced they discarded one by one each of their 7 veils. As the veils were thrown off, more and more hashish was released from the capsules, and the young men saw with greater clarity, felt with deeper intensity, experienced beauty and sexual joy in a way completely unknown in their previous earth lives. Then, as each young man sat entranced by the beauty and wonder of heaven, the houris finished the dance, and, nude and splendid as they were, rushed forward in a bunch, like flowers cast before the wind. And some fell at the candidate's feet and kissed his ankles, some kissed knees or thighs, some suckled rapidly at his penis, others kissed the chest and arms and belly, a few kissed eyes and mouth and ears, and as he was smothered in this hashish-intensified avalanche of love, the lady working on his penis suckled, and he climaxed in her mouth as softly and slowly and blissfully as a single snowflake falling. In a little while there was no more hashish being released, and more opium began to flow into the bloodstream. The young candidates slept again, and in their torpor they were removed from the Garden of Delights and returned to the banquet hall of the Lord Hassan. There they awoke. "Truly," the first exclaimed, "I have seen the glories of heaven, as foretold in Al-Quran. I have no more doubts. I will trust Hassani Sabah and love him and serve him." "You are accepted for the Order of Assassins," said Hassan solemnly. "Go at once to the green room and meet your superior in the order." When his candidate had left, Hassan turned to the second, asking, "And you?" "I have discovered the first matter, the medicine of metals, the elixir of life, the stone of the philosophers, true wisdom and perfect happiness," said he, quoting the alchemical formula, "and it is inside my own head." Hassani Sabah grinned broadly. "Welcome to the Order of the Illuminati," he said, laughing. Hassani Sabah was not the first or last student of the ways in which sexuality can be transmuted into Fifth Circuit rapture. Further to the east, there were tantric schools within Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism, which taught techniques in which prolongation of the genital embrace could explode into dramatic brain change. In the West, underground cults of Gnostics, Illuminati, alchemists, and witches kept similar techniques as closely guarded secrets, for if the Holy Inquisition ever learned of such practices, the participants would be denounced as devil worshippers and burned at the stake. In our own time, there has been a revolutionary upsurge of these ancient neurological secrets, with an admixture of more modern techniques. Tantric teachers are available in many cities. Masters and Johnson use quasi-tantric practices to treat sexual dysfunctions. As early as 1968, a poll by McLaughlin showed that 85% of the pot smokers in the country said their chief interest in the weed was its function as an enhancer of erotic sensation. Vibrators and other sexual toys proliferate, gays come out of the closet, philosophers of a culture without repression, Norman Brown, Henry Marcuse, Charles Reich, become bestsellers. Saul Kent, a writer on medical science for general audiences, has even suggested that electronic sexual surrogates can and will be manufactured in the near future. Your own Marilyn Monroe doll. Instead of joining Tom Wolfe and the Neo-Puritans and throwing up our hands in horror at such an idea, let us consider it for a moment. Let us see if we can peek outside our imprinted conditioned reality tunnel. If a sexual android is possible in 1995 or 2005 or wherever, why not a totally programmed sexual environment? Let us call this, in memory of Hermann Hesse, the Magic Theater. We start with what is concurrently available in high-priced brothels in the hedonic Sunbelt section of America. Massage, a first-circuit tranquilizer, has all the advantages of the opiates without being habit-forming. Our Magic Theater, then, would include computerized body relaxers and energizers better than current massage techniques. Porn movies are available for stimulation in the better brothels. Our Magic Theater would have them in 3D on all 4 walls, obviously. Marijuana and stimulants like cocaine or speed are available in brothels everywhere. Our Magic Theater would have better chemical rapture agents. One can go on adding details according to personal fantasy until one has created a room in which bliss can be extended in all dimensions indefinitely. A strange thing has happened in constructing this cyberneticalese brothel. We have seemed to have gone beyond sex to something that might be called metasex. While specific genital pleasure might still be fun, it is hardly as important as it seemed to us before we came into this multidimensional pleasure dome where all senses are stimulated to ecstasy. And the most peculiar thing about this bawdy science fiction projection is that we don't even need to build a magic room. It is built into our brains already. We have been describing the positive neurosomatic consciousness, which Freud called polymorphous perversity in one of his Puritan moods, and the oceanic experience in one of his mystical moments. This is what the neurosomatically turned on brain feels like. In alchemy, this is once known as the multiplication of the first matter, or the philosopher's gold, which was unlike ordinary gold in that it could not be spent or used up, since it perpetually multiplied and renewed itself. It was the third eye of the Illuminati tradition, which transforms all it sees, the eye of which Jesus speaks in his gnomic aphorism, "The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body will be full of light." Matt chapter 6, verse 22. Exercises. 1. Get the lesson book from the local Christian Science reading room and read the lessons for a month. 2. Attend a Sufi weekend seminar. 3. Acquire my book, Sex and Drugs, and try the tantric exercises there described. 4. Learn how to do pranayama properly from an expert. I have tried describing this elsewhere and have found there is no way to prevent gross errors in verbal transmission of this nonverbal knowledge. Get a Hindu to show you. 5. DeFree John, an American guru, says you can reach illumination by constantly asking, who is the one who is living me now? Well, is it Circuit 1 consciousness, Circuit 2 ego, Circuit 3 mind, Circuit 4 sexual, Circuit 5 gestalt field, or a higher circuit? Who is it? Where is it? How old is it? 6. Dr. Aidan Kelly has suggested that the so-called unconsciousness is more conscious than the so-called conscious mind. That is, the unconscious contains all the feedbacks of the neurosomatic circuit and the other circuits that maintain life. Consider this idea. Is this the one who is living you now? Circuit number 6, the metaprogramming circuit. According to Alfred Korzybski, any idea or mental state is a brain circuit which the brain itself can contemplate, thereby having an idea about the idea, or a mental state about the mental state, etc. There is no theoretical or real limit to the higher ordering process. It is the infinity within of which mystics speak. Dr. John Lilly says, in the province of the mind, what is believed true is true or becomes true within limits to be earned by experience and experiment. These limits are further beliefs to be transcended. In the province of the mind, there are no limits. Mind and its contents are functionally identical. My wife only exists for me in my mind. Not being a solipsist, I recognize the converse. I only exist for her in her mind. Lest the reader exclaim like Byron of Wordsworth, I wish he would explain this explanation. Let us try it this way. If I am so fortunate as to be listening to the Hammerklavier Sonata, the only correct answer, if you ask me suddenly, who are you, would be to hum the Hammerklavier. For with music of that quality, one is hypnotized into rapt attention. There is no division between me and my experience. In heavy meditation, when I think of me, I am me. When I think of me and you, I am me and you. When I think of you alone, I am not there anymore. When I think of God, I am God. What I see with my eyes closed and with my eyes open is the same stuff, brain circuitry. Mathematician J.W. Dunn puts the matter in a parable. A painter who had escaped from the asylum to which he was justly or unjustly confined decided to paint the field in which he found himself. Finished, he looked at the result and realized that something was missing, namely, himself and his canvas, which were part of the field. So he started over and painted himself and his canvas in the field. But examining the results with philosophical analysis, he realized that something was still missing, namely, himself and his canvas on which he was painting himself and his canvas in the field. So he started a third time and a fourth, ad infinitum. We think of the paintings of M.C. Escher at this point, or we recall the old folk tale of the farmer who set out to market with 10 donkeys, on one of which he rode. After a while, he began to wonder if any of the donkeys had strayed, and he began counting. There seemed to be only 9. Disturbed, he dismounted and walked around the herd, counting carefully, and there were 10 after all. So he remounted and went on to riding, until worry beset him again. So he counted another time, and there were 9. So once again he dismounted and walked around, counting carefully to find 10. The process is repeated until he finally solves the problem, carrying 1 donkey on his back and driving the other 9 before him. The disappearing donkey trick is the epitome of ideas about ideas about ideas, paintings of paintings of paintings, etc. The disappearing donkey is a synodoche of the metaprogramming circuit of the nervous system. The metaprogramming circuit, known as the soul in Gnosticism, the no-mind Ushin in China, the white light of the void in Tibetan Buddhism, Shiva Darshana in Hinduism, the true intellectual center in Gurdjieff, simply represents the brain becoming aware of itself. The artist seeing himself in his painting, seeing himself in his painting. In the Zen metaphor, it is a mirror that reflects anything, but does not hold on to anything. It is a conscious mirror that knows it can always reflect something else by changing its angle of reflection. This is analyzed mathematically in G. Spencer Brown's Laws of Form, an analog using not Brown's math but Gödel's, and employing illustrations from the music of Bach and the paintings of Escher, is Hofstede's Gödel, Escher, Bach. Most of the occult literature of the world, aside from the 95% of that which is sheer rubbish, consists of tricks, gimmicks, and games, which the Hindus call upaya, clever ways, to trigger metaprogramming unconsciousness. This generally means leading the student all round Robin Hood's barn as many times as are necessary until the poor victim discovers he has created the barn for himself. For instance, a popular game with California occultists, I do not know its inventor, involves a magic room, much like the pleasure dome discussed earlier, except that this magic room contains an omniscient computer. To play this game, you simply astrally project into the magic room. Do not ask what astral projection means, and do not assume it is metaphysical and therefore either impossible if you are a materialist or very difficult if you are a mystic. Just assume that this is a giganten experiment, a mind game. Protect yourself in imagination into this magic room and visualize vividly the omniscient computer, using the details you need to make such a super information processor real to your fantasy. You do not need any knowledge of programming to handle this astral computer. It exists in the 1990s or early in the next century. You are getting to use it by a species of time travel, if that metaphor is amusing and helpful to you. It is so built that it responds immediately to human brainwaves, reading them and decoding their meaning. Crude prototypes of such computers already exist. So when you are in this magic room, you can ask this computer anything just by thinking of what you want to know. It will read your thought and project onto your brain by a laser ray the correct answer. There is one slight problem. The computer is very sensitive to all brain waves. If you have any doubts, it registers them as negative commands, meaning do not answer my question. So the way to use it is to start simply with easy questions. Ask it to dig out of the archives the name of your second grade teacher. Almost everybody remembers the name of their first grade teacher, imprint vulnerability again, but that of the second grade teacher tends to get lost. When the computer has dug out the name of your second grade teacher, try it on a harder question, but not one that is too hard. It is very easy to sabotage this machine, but you don't want to sabotage it during these experiments. You want to see how well it can be made to perform. It is wise to ask only one question at a time, since it requires concentration to keep this magic computer real on the field of your perception. Do not exhaust your capacities for imagination and visualization on your first trial runs. After a few trivial experiments of the second grade teacher variety, you can try more interesting programs. Take a person toward whom you have negative feelings, such as anger, disappointment, feeling of betrayal, jealousy, or whatever interferes with the smooth, tranquil operation of your own biocomputer. Ask the magic computer to explain that other person to you, to translate you into their reality tunnel long enough for you to understand how events seem to them. Especially ask how you seem to them. The poet prayed, "Oh, would come some power the gifty gie us, to see ourselves as others see us." This computer will do that job for you, but be prepared for some shocks which might be disagreeable at first. This super brain can also perform exegesis on ideas that seem obscure, paradoxical, or enigmatic to us. For instance, early experiments with this computer can very profitably turn on asking it to explain some of the propositions in this book which may seem inexplicable or perversely wrong-headed to you, such as, "We are all greater artists than we realize," or "What the thinker thinks, the prover proves," or "Mind and its contents are functionally identical." This computer is much more powerful and scientifically advanced than the rapture machine in the neurosomatic circuit. It has total access to all the earlier primitive circuits and overrules any of them. That is, if you put a metaprogramming instruction into this computer, it will relay it downward into the old circuits and cancel contradictory programs left over from the past. For instance, try feeding it on such metaprogramming instructions as, "I am at cause over my body. I am at cause over my imagination. I am at cause over my future. My mind abounds with beauty and power. I like people, and people like me." Remember that this computer is only a few decades ahead of present technology, so it cannot understand your commands if you harbor any doubts about them. Doubts tell it not to perform. Work always from what you can believe in, extending the area of belief only as results encourage you to try for more dramatic transformations of your past reality tunnels. This represents cybernetic consciousness, the programmer becoming self-programmer, self-metaprogrammer, meta-metaprogrammer, etc. Just as the emotional compulsions of the second circuit seem primitive, mechanical, and ultimately silly to the neurosomatic consciousness, so too the reality maps of the third circuit become comic, relativistic, game-like to the metaprogrammer. Whatever you say it is, it isn't. Korbisky, the semanticist, repeated endlessly in his seminars, trying to make clear that third circuit semantic maps are not the territories they represent. That we can always make maps of our maps, revisions of our revisions, meta-selves of our other selves. Neddy, not that, Hindu teachers traditionally say when asked what God is or what reality is. Yogis, mathematicians, and musicians seem more inclined to develop metaprogramming consciousness than most of humanity. Korbisky even claimed that the use of mathematical scripts is an aid to developing this circuit, for as soon as you think of your mind as mind, and the mind which contemplates that mind as mind, and the mind which contemplates mind contemplating mind as mind, you are well on your way to metaprogramming awareness. Alice in Wonderland is a masterful guide to the metaprogramming circuit written by one of the founders of mathematical logic. And Aleister Crowley soberly urged its study upon all students of yoga. R. Buckminster Fuller illustrates the metaprogramming circuit in his lectures by pointing out that we feel puny in comparison to the size of the universe, but only our bodies, hardware, are puny. Our minds, he says, by which he means our software, contain the universe by the act of comprehending it. The sixth metaprogramming circuit is the most recent in evolutionary time and seems to be located in the frontal lobes. That is why the traditional Hindu exercise it to activate it to fix the consciousness in the front of the forehead and hold it there, hour after hour, day after day, year after year, until the metaprogrammer awakes and you begin to create infinite realities where before there was only one static jail cell reality in which you were trapped. As said above, this circuit is the soul of the Gnostics as distinct from the self. The self seems to be fixed and firm, but it is not. That is, whatever circuit you are operating on at the moment is yourself at the moment. If I point a gun at you, you go to circuit 1 consciousness at once, and that is yourself at that instant. But if you are sexually attracted to somebody, you go to circuit 4, and that is yourself until you are orgasmically satisfied or hopelessly frustrated. Most of the preliminary exercises in Sufi and Gurdjieff schools consist in making you aware that the self is not constant, but shifts back and forth between the imprints on the various circuits. The soul, or circuit 6, is constant because it is, as the Chinese say, void or no form. It plays all the roles you play: oral dependent, emotional tyrant, cool rationalist, romantic seducer, neurosomatic healer, neurogenetic evolutionary visionary. But it is none of them. It is plastic. It is no form, because it is all forms. It is the creative void of the Taoists. If this begins to sound like nonsense, that is inevitable on this level. As Lewis Morgan notes, in books on linguistics, there always comes a point at which the prose itself becomes wildly incomprehensible, disintegrating into nonsense. The same happens, Morgan notes, beyond a certain point in modern mathematics. Gödel's theorem was once explained to me by a patient, a gentle mathematician, and just as I was taking it all in, nodding appreciatively at the beauty of the whole idea, it all turned into nonsense inside my head. It happens in both linguistics and mathematics because it happens in consciousness itself, and language and math are just models of consciousness. Mind is a tool invented by the universe to see itself, but it can never see all of itself, for much the same reason that you can't see your own back without mirrors. Or as Alan Watts liked to say, because the tongue ultimately cannot taste the tongue. Ideas about ideas, mathematics about mathematics, Gödel, language about language, consciousness of consciousness, the whole Sixth Circuit brings us into what Hofstadter calls strange loops. Like the legendary cocoa bird, we follow our own tail around in ever-narrowing circles, but unlike that mythic bird, we never complete the process by flying up our own rectums and disappearing. It just seems like we're about to self-destruct in that colorful way, and then we decide that we have been reading, or thinking, or perceiving must be nonsense. It is not nonsense. We are merely confronting infinity where we least expected to encounter it, in our own lonely selves. Physics joined linguistics, mathematics, and psychology in this meta-programming hall of mirrors when Schrödinger demonstrated that quantum events are not objective in the Newtonian sense. For 50 years since then, physicists have been struggling to build a system that will get them out of this strange loop. The results have been as funny as a Zen koan. For instance, Niels Bohr proposed the Copenhagen interpretation, which merely says, in the manner Gödel, that our equations do not describe the universe really. They describe the mental processes we have to put ourselves through to describe the universe. True enough, and this whole book is a Copenhagen interpretation of psychology and owes everything to Dr. Bohr, but we are still in a strange loop, and most physicists want to get out. Dr. John von Neumann proved that there was no way out. This is technically known as von Neumann's catastrophe of the infinite regress, and it merely shows that any device that will get us out of the first strange loop, the Copenhagen collapse of objectivity, will just lead us into a second strange loop, and any way out of that will lead into an inexorable third strange loop, and so on forever. Everybody is still trying to refute von Neumann, but nobody has been successful. I can't get out. My horns won't fit through the door. The metaprogramming circuit is not a trap. As Joyce would say, it only looks as like it is. Damn it. Simply accept that the universe is so structured that it can see itself, and that this self-reflexive arc is built into our frontal lobes so that consciousness contains an infinite regress, and all we can do is make models of ourselves making models. Well, at that point, the only thing to do is relax and enjoy the show. This is what the Hindus call Shiva Darshana, or the divine dance. You are still in life, or life is in you, but since there are infinite aspects to everything, especially to the you who is observing and creating all these muddles and models, there are no limits. The only sensible goal, then, is to try to build a reality tunnel for next week that is bigger, funnier, sexier, more optimistic, and generally less boring than any previous reality tunnel. And once you have built that bigger, funnier, happier universe of thought, build a bigger and better one for next month. Exercises. 1. If all you can know is your own brain programs operating, the whole universe you experience is inside your head. Try to hold on to that model for at least an hour. Now, notice how often you relapse into thinking the universe as outside you. 2. Consider the belief system or reality tunnel of an educated reader 1200 years ago, in 783 AD. How much of that tunnel still seems real? How much in our reality tunnel was unknown or invisible then? Consider the reality tunnel of an educated person 1,200 years ago, 1,200 years from now, in 3183 AD. How much of our reality tunnel will still seem real? How much of the 3183 AD reality tunnel is unknown or invisible to us? 4. Reread Moses' encounter with I am who I am in Deuteronomy. Try the theory that Moses was talking to his own metaprogramming circuit. Circuit number 6. The collective neurogenetic circuit. The seventh circuit of the brain kicks into action when the nervous system begins to receive signals from within the individual neuron, from the RNA-DNA dialogue, the neurogenetic feedback system. The entire nervous system, including the brain, has been designed like the rest of the body by the code within the DNA molecule, which sends signals via messenger RNA molecules to tell the organism what to do. Grow red hair, have blue eyes, stand up and walk now, start to talk, find a mate, etc. Our entire mental lives, our brain hardware and software, exist within the perimeters of this DNA master tape. With neurogenetic consciousness, these DNA archives become accessible to brain scanning while awake. They are always accessible as archetypes of the Jungian collective unconscious during dreaming sleep. The first to achieve neurogenetic awareness a few thousand years ago spoke of memories of past lives, reincarnation, immortality, etc. That these neurological adepts were speaking of something real in the best language of their day is indicated by the fact that many of them, especially Hindus and Sufis, gave marvelously accurate poetic vistas of evolution millenniums before Darwin and foresaw superhumanity before Nietzsche. The Greeks called this the vision of Pan, the Chinese the great Tao, Hindus Atman consciousness. The numinous, awful, sublime god, goddess, and demon figures who appear in the initial stages of this awakening are Jung's archetypes of the collective unconscious and are recognized as visitors from dream time by primitives and as them from Siddhi by witches, as the weird people in 1,000 folk traditions. Gurdjieff calls this circuit the true emotional center. The Akashic records of theosophy, the phylogenetic unconscious of Dr. Stanislaus Grof, the Gaia hypothesis of biologists Margulis and Lovelock, which holds that the biosphere of this planet is one intelligent organism, and three modern metaphors for this circuit. The visions of past and future evolution described by those who have had trans-time experiences during close-to-death or clinical death trauma also describe the Circuit 7 neurogenetic reality tunnel. Specific exercises to trigger neurogenetic imprints are not to be found in yogic teaching. It usually happens, if at all, after many years of expertise in the kind of advanced Raja Yoga that develops Circuit 5 somatic bliss. Heavy doses of LSD, of course, always trigger temporary neurogenetic vistas. The neurogenetic circuit is best considered, in terms of current science, as the genetic archives are activated by excitement of antihistone proteins, the DNA memory coiling back into the dawn of life and containing also the genetic blueprints for the future of evolution. I am he that was and is and shall be, a sentence from the Egyptian Book of the Dead in hieroglyph and in his own handwriting, was found on the desk where Beethoven composed the Ninth Symphony and all his later aeon-spanning evolutionary music. One judges from this and from the music itself that Beethoven had opened the neurogenetic circuit. Here dwell primordial archetypes, far older than the language yet newer than tomorrow. Personifying this circuit as being, Crowley tells us, the babe in the egg of blue, cf. the final image of Kubrick's 2001, Robert Anton Wilson, represents the higher self. The connection is with the symbolism of the dwarf in mythology. In his absolute innocence and ignorance, he is the fool, he is the savior, the great fool of Celtic legend, the pure fool of Act 1 of Parsifal. He is also the green man of spring festivals, so we see him fully armed as Bacchus Diffuus, male and female in one, the bisexual Baphomet, and Zeus Arethinolus, equally bisexual. He is shown in this full form in the Tarot Trump 15, the devil, But the small person of Hindu mysticism, the dwarf, insane yet crafty of many legends and many lands, is also this same, silent self of a man, or his holy guardian angel. These images are not poetic whimsies by Crowley. They reappear in the dreams of individuals, the personal myth of the night, in the myths of all peoples, the impersonal dreams of the species, and of course, over and over in UFO contact stories. The language of this circuit is the multi-level language of Finnegan's Wake, where Finnegan is Finn again. Finn MacCool of Irish legend reborn, and Huck Finn again also, sailing down Mrs. Liffey, both the river Anna Liffey in Ireland and Huck Finn's Mississippi, where Mark the Wan is King Mark, cuckolded by Tristan, but Mark the Twy is Mark Twain, married to a wife he called Livy, just like the Irish River. And Mark the Tris is cuckolded Mark and cuckolding Tristan in one, while Marcus Lyons is all of them, plus Mark the Apostle, his emblematic lion always shown with him in medieval art, Leo the lion, Leo in the zodiac and all associated fire signs, and one of the four old men, Matt Gregory, Marcus Lyons, Luke Tarpey, and Johnny McDougal, who haunt the dreamer all night long, symbolizing the four evangelists, the four bedposts surrounding the sleeper, the four antique circuits, the four suits of tarot ordinary playing cards, the four elements of the ancients, and all the other fours that Jung has found omnipresent in the collective unconscious. To parallel the evolution of the first four circuits in human and mammalian history, Joyce also offers the four stages of the development of the grasshopper: egg, larva, chrysalis, adult, and such dream logical quantifications as egg burst, egg blend, egg burial, and hatch as hatch can. Their weatherings and their marryings and the buryings and their natural selections. A human pest, cycling pissed, and recycling past, and there he goes pust, again, etc. This archetypal circuit is replete with what Jung called synchronicities, meaningful coincidences, which he attributed to the circuit's roots in what he called the psychoid level, below the personal and collective unconscious, where mind and matter are not yet differentiated, the royal highway of the DNA, RNA, CNS, central nervous system telegraph, in our metaphor. Such synchronicities are a sure sign that you are dealing with the neurogenetic circuit. For instance, in a Finnegan's Wake study group, we are all convulsed with laughter when noticing that toot and come in is not just a parody of American cutesy pie motel names, but another of Joyce's countless puns on Tutankhamun. At this point, my wife entered the room to inquire what was so funny. When we explained, she said, "That's a synchronicity. I was just watching a TV program about Tutankhamun." And of course, Joyce put the boy king into the dream because the main theme of Finnegan's Wake, the main theme of the neurogenetic circuit, is the survival of genetic memory through time, symbolized by the resurrection myth, and Tut was dug up, resurrected, synchronistically, just after Joyce started to work on this epic. As Joyce explains the logic of the neurogenetic circuit, this orth of years is naught save brick dust, and being hummus the same returns, the earth gives back in new forms what is buried. Since on the bunk of our breadwinning lies the corpse of our seed father, comment superfluous to those who know the golden bough, and foul if you but will rise if you must. The seed, the genetic code, and the egg, cellular wisdom, sends the signal down the eons. In the similar metaphor of noble geneticist Herbert Muller, we're all but giant robots manufactured by DNA to make more DNA. To the individual, the breaks in the chain of life, death, are all too real and painful. To the seed and egg wisdom of the neurogenetic circuit, the seamless unity of life, death, death, life, is the greater reality. The neurogenetic circuit is probably located in the right neocortex and is more recent than the neurosomatic circuit in the back sections of the right cortex. Circuit 5, Neurosomatic Consciousness, allows you to converse with the evolutionary architect who designed your body and billions of others since the dawn of life around 3 to 4 million years ago. This architect is the greatest designer on this planet, as Bucky Fuller has often commented. No human architect has yet equaled her efficiency or her aesthetics in such routine products as roses, eggs, insect colonies, fish, etc. She or he can be personified in modern terms as mother DNA or father nucleic acid. The rationalist immediately objects that such personification however inescapable it is to all who have encountered the architect directly on this circuit, is illegitimate because she or he is unconscious. The rebuttal given by all Circuit 7 adepts in all cultures and all ages is that she or he is not unconscious but intoxicated, and it is a divine intoxication. Less poetically, whether we humanize this architect into a big mama or big daddy, or animalize it into a jackal-headed being like the Egyptian, or sexualize it into a divine praying mantis like one African tribe, or spiritualize it into something totally abstract like Hindus and Christian scientists, we're only depicting one cross-section of this 3 to 4 billion-year-old being. When we molecularize it as DNA, we're also only seeing one cross-section, the most useful cross-section for scientific analysis. That is all that needs to be said, or should be said, for the scientific materialist chemicalization of the biosphere, and it is no contradiction of direct experience of the being itself via Circuit 7 yogas, biological or chemical. Indeed, the direct experience undoubtedly can and has helped many scientists get a wider, more holistic view of what is going on in evolution, which they have brought down to Circuit 3 in better linguistic models. Teilhard de Chardin is one, but not the only, example of a scientist whose evolutionary model has been improved by such direct Circuit 7 experience. For those who have not yet had Circuit 7 experience, and most of humanity will possess the technology to turn on this circuit at will within the next 20 years, this evolutionary perspective might possibly be conveyed by a series of quantum jumps in perspective, thus. The individual can make mistakes, even fatal ones. Consciousness of circuits 1 through 5 is far from infallible. We all get into messes, and sometimes they kill us. The gene pool can make mistakes, but less frequently. Most gene pools have a lifespan far beyond any individual by a factor of many thousands. Obviously, if we judge intelligence by survival, gene pools made up of the information of many million individuals are more intelligent than any individuals, even geniuses. Einstein was not as smart as the Jewish people collectively. He created relativity and was smart enough to escape the Nazis. The Jews historically created dozens of ideas as important as relativity and survived hundreds of pogroms. The species is even more intelligent than the gene pool. It lives millions of times longer than any individual, many thousand times longer than any gene pool. The biosphere, Gaia, the DNA script, is more intelligent than all individuals, gene pools, and species. It has survived everything thrown at it for nearly 4 billion years, and is getting smarter all the time. It is on the edge of achieving immortality. Through the seventh circuit, it has a better eye to see itself and judge its trajectories than ever before. It is getting ready to leave this planet and expand across the universe. Beethoven, to cite him one more time, said, "Anybody who understands my music will never be unhappy again." That is because his music is the song of the seventh circuit, of Gaia, the life spirit, becoming conscious of herself, of her powers, of her own capacities for infinite progress. Exercises. 1. List at least 15 similarities between New York or any large city and an insect colony, such as a beehive or termite hill. If you can't think of at least 15, read Edward Wilson's Sociobiology. Contemplate the information in the DNA loop, which created both of these enclaves of high coherence and organization in primate and insect societies. 2. Read the Upanishads, and every time you see the word Atman or world soul translated as DNA blueprint, see if it makes sense to you that way. 3. Contemplating these issues usually triggers Jungian synchronicities. See how long after reading this chapter you encounter an amazing coincidence, e.g. seeing DNA on a license plate, having a copy of the Upanishads given to you unexpectedly, seeing an image like Crowley's Pan or Great Mother in a work of popular art, etc. 4. Explain such a synchronicity, when it occurs, in Circuit 3 rationalist terms, mere coincidence, etc. 5. Psychologist Barbara Honegger explains synchronicities by saying that the right brain hemisphere, where this circuit is located, moves you in space-time to the place where the synchronicity will occur, while the rationalist left brain invents rationalizations to go there. Synchronicities are a language through which this circuit communicates with the left brain in this theory. Try explaining coincidences by that theory. What messages is your right brain trying to send to your left brain? Jung and several of his disciples, e.g. Coleman, Steger, Fiedler, have suggested that UFOs are messages from this collective DNA circuit to the left brain. What do such messages mean? What is the right brain trying to tell us? Circuit number 8, the non-local quantum circuit. A domesticated primate philosopher on an oxygen-supported carbon-based planet circling a Type G star, namely the present author, was once asked, "How do we think?" "Well, we have a built-in biosurvival circuit which distinguishes nourishment-giving things from predatory things." "But can that circuit do all our thinking?" "Well, no, but then there's an emotional territorial circuit." But, it's circuits all the way," I said. What the thinker thinks, the prover proves. We have made a beautiful, we hope beautiful, model of consciousness in terms of brain hardware and software. Now we need to remember that, again, while the brain can be modeled by a computer, the model is never the whole system. The model maker or metaprogrammer is bigger than the model or program. In what are called out-of-body experiences, OOBEs, by parapsychologists, awareness seems to escape the confines of the nervous system entirely. Such experiences are routinely triggered by advanced yoga practice, and they also occur spontaneously during what is called near-death or clinical death, in which the patient appears to die by all medical standards but is revived by modern resuscitation techniques. OOBEs also occur with heavy doses of LSD and with ketamine, an aesthetic with strangely psychedelic side effects. They are also reported in shamanic traditions all over the world and by many occultists in our own society. Example, one day in 1973, during a neuroprogramming experiment, I saw something happening to my son at exactly that time in Arizona, over 500 miles away. We can process this datum in various ways. We can say that my astral body actually traveled to Arizona. This is the occultist theory. We can more conservatively say, I developed extrasensory perception and saw Arizona without going there. There are many parapsychologists who prefer this third circuit map of the eighth circuit experience. We can try to aver that I only happened to think of that scene while it was happening, by synchronicity. This is the Jungian approach. Or we can sweep it under the carpet by muttering mere coincidence or sheer coincidence, which is the rational, traditional, rationalist approach. We prefer to say, in accordance with earlier writings of Timothy Leary and the present author in the speculations of the Physics Consciousness Research Group in San Francisco, that such cases illustrate a special working of what is called in quantum mechanics Bell's theorem. Bell's theorem is highly technical, but in ordinary language it amounts to something like this. There are no isolated systems. Every particle in the universe is in instantaneous, faster than light communication with every other particle. The whole system, even the parts that are separated by cosmic distances, functions as a whole system. Now, such faster-than-light communication seems to be forbidden by special relativity, which makes it a problem. Bell's theorem, however, is inescapable. A theorem in physics is not a mere theory, it is a mathematical demonstration which must be true. If the mathematics contains no flaw, and if the experiments on which it is based are replicable. Bell's theorem contains no mathematical flaw, and the experiments are replicable and have been replicated several times. And yet we cannot dispense with special relativity either, because the mathematics there is equally iron, and the experiments are legion that confirm it. Two solutions have been proposed, and both assume that communication involved in Bellian transmissions does not involve energy, since it is energy that cannot move faster than light. Dr. Edward Harris Walker suggests that what does move faster than light and holds the whole system together is consciousness. We may eventually be forced to accept this, in which case physics will have justified pantheism or at least panpsychism. The other alternative, proposed by Dr. Jack Sarfati, is that the medium of Bellian transmissions is information. Pure information, in the mathematical sense, does not require energy. It is that which orders energy. It is a negative of entropy, that which brings disorder to energy systems. Dr. Sarfati explains his theory as follows. Imagine that your brain is a computer, as modern neurology suggests. Now imagine that the whole universe is a big computer, a megacomputer, as John Lilly has proposed. Then imagine that the subquantum realm, the realm of what Dr. David Bohm calls hidden variables, is made up of many, many computers. Now the hardware of each computer, the universe, your brain, the subquantum mechanisms, is localized. Each part of it is somewhere in space-time, here not there, now not then. But the software, the information, is non-local. It is here, there, and everywhere, now, then, and everywhen. The highest varieties of shamanic and yogic consciousness seem to begin from dilation beyond the immediate, out-of-body experience and dilate rapidly and dizzily much further to union with the smallest and largest, the cosmic mind, in short. This seems to be what would necessarily happen if the brain turned on to the non-local information system proposed by Sarfati and implicit in Bell's theorem. The metaphysiological circuit, then, is this cosmic information system. The synchronicities of circuits 5 to 7 are just the dawning notes of the symphony of all interrelated harmonies related to those who have experienced circuit 8 in action. It is hard to avoid hyperbole when talking of such matters, but everything one can associate with the idea of oneness with God is a part of what is experienced in the vistas, beyond space-time, of this metaphysiological circuit. Mystics stammer, gibber, and wave incoherently in trying to discuss this. Beethoven says it all for all of them, without words, in the fourth movement of the Ninth Symphony. The words of Schiller's Ode to Joy, which Beethoven set to this virtually superhuman music, are a linear third circuit map conveying only a skeleton key to the multi-level meanings of the eighth circuit language of the melodic construction itself, which spans all consciousness from primitive biosurvival to metaphysiological cosmic fusion. The whole system is a whole system. The metaphysiological circuit. Wheels within wheels within wheels. Dr. Sarfati's computers within computers with computers. Consciousness or information perceived as coherent intelligence, expanding to infinity in all directions. Notes and thanks. In Prometheus Rising, Robert Anton Wilson switched the 6th and 7th circuits from Timothy Leary's original design. In his later book, Cosmic Trigger, Robert Anton Wilson corrected this order to match Leary's. I have also corrected the order in this reading. A link to the full text of Prometheus Rising is in the description of this video if you would like to purchase the book and read the entire thing, which I highly suggest. And if you've made it this far, thanks so much for listening. You are part of what makes this channel great, and you are why I keep on coming back to YouTube. And just one last note, if you'd like to hear more of this, if you'd like more videos like this, and you'd like to see what else it is that I do, please subscribe. If you'd like to thumbs up this video to show your appreciation, I'd really appreciate it. And please leave me any comments with any feedback that you have on this and any future work. And as always, have a wonderful, wonderful day.